Hey Sailor Guardians, it is time for another episode of Moonlight Justice. I'm your host, Grayson.
Oh, is it my turn?
Girl, get it together.
Hi, I'm Lucy.
And I'm Z.
Okay. And we are very excited to bring you our second episode. We have been working very hard on our schedule, and we have some great content and guests lined up, very much like today. Sailor Moon Universe has multiple iterations of its canon, and much like any fandom, has its fair share of fan work. Today is February 25th, but today we are honoring International Fanworks Day, which was celebrated February 15th.
Woo!
According to fanlore.org, International Fanworks Day communities and individuals are encouraged to celebrate and promote fan work of all kinds. There are various ways to get involved, such as reaching out to your legislators to campaign for the public right to remix, work on your work-in-progress fan work, writing about what fan work means to you, and sharing by promoting your fan work or your favorite fan work to others. Steffa, user S. Goldris, from TikTok recommended some of our guests, and we have invited them to join us to talk about Sailor Moon fan work, what it means to them, and what projects they are working on, as well as some fun Sailor Moon discussion. Before we begin, we always go over the power of three principles we abide by here at Moonlight Justice. 1. Practice controversy with civility. We can respectfully discuss our thoughts and opinions without a feeling of judgment. 2. Things can always be discussed constructively and positively. And 3, we will not engage in racism, xenophobia, any type of phobias, triggers. However, these topics might come up and might be addressed in correlation with discussions that we might have. With that said, let's meet our guest, and we will start with Kao.
Hello. Sorry, nervous. Wow. Hi. I'm Kaosu of KaosuStudios. I am the creator of the visual fan series Sailor Moon Sacrifice on YouTube, and we have recently become a fan manga.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Our next guest is FloraOne.
Hi, I'm Flora. I am from Germany. In real life, I'm a psychologist and sex researcher, which comes up in my fan fiction a lot. So people who know me know that. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And we have Daikon1.
Hi, I am Daikon. My pen name is Daikon1 on AO3 only because regular Daikon was already taken. I am a health educator in the US with a focus on sexual health and reproductive justice, which also shows up in the Usamama fanfiction that I write.
And last but certainly not least, we have Jacket, UglyGreenJacket.
Hi, I'm UglyGreenJacket. I am also in the US. I don't really have any important things to bring to my fanfiction like some of the others. I'm a photographer, and I'm just here to have fun. So
awesome. It's great to have you all, and thank you for taking the time and the energy to join us. Scheduling is probably the hardest thing to do for this podcast, and I'm glad that we were all able to agree on a time to be able to come together and talk about Sailor Moon. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in, and I'm going to ask the question, and then we'll go down the line and get your answers from each of you, and you'll also have some input from Z and Lumi as well. So our first question is, what does Sailor Moon mean to you? And I would like to hear Flora go first.
It's kind of a very hard question to answer. Like when he sent this was one of the hardest. But yeah, I would say that especially Star Season Usagi is kind of my moral compass, I would say. I mean, the show both introduced me to themes like queer feminist themes, and influenced me a lot by not being black and white. And I mean, I first saw this in the 90s. I'm in my 30s now, so the core Sailor Moon generation, I would say. And like Usagi as someone who does redeem the bad guys, who definitely is a character who embraces people, whatever they did, is someone who believes in that anyone can change and that there are no good or bad people, but there are people and there's human behavior and there's hurt, and you can embrace that and do different acts. And that's something that definitely shaped me. And I mean, it's completely exaggerated, but I do think she has a small part to play into the person I became, into my profession, as in like psychology. It's also very much the core theme that behavioral and social influences are what make actions, and not that a person is just bad or just good. So only good and evil acts done by impressionable people. And yeah, Usagi was the first who introduced me to that line of thinking. And of course, I was a baby shipper. Though I will have to say, back then when I was a little girl, I was shipping predominantly Seiya and Usagi, and not Mamoru and Usagi. So, yeah.
That's really
long-winded answer. But yes, that's what
it's a great answer, and I think it's interesting how Sailor Moon ties into our professions. I live in the U.S. myself. I work in local government here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am in human services. So I think what's interesting about the work that I do, and I think just in general my perception of human behavior, is that, you know, we make good and bad choices, and that does not necessarily make us good and bad people. And I think that some people, I think especially today, in today's society, where people tend to let the actions define the character, because if that was applied to Sailor Moon, Galaxia wouldn't have a chance.
Yeah.
So it's a very great answer. Lumi or Z, did you guys have any input on that?
I personally do not. To kind of reiterate what you said, though, G, just about how it's really cool that the things that you do as a profession ties into your work. I personally think that's super duper cool. Hearing how you're into psychology and all that, as somebody that minored in popular culture, I had to study psychology and sociology and all the ologies and stuff. So I think that's really fascinating and super duper cool.
Right, like I think it's really cool that the fact that your guys' profession is what affects like your work. And a little bit of a spoiler, when I was reading your stuff, I was like, ooh, experience. Okay, all right.
Okay, so Kao, what does Sailor Moon mean to you?
You know, I was thinking about this on the way home because, as Flora said, it's probably one of the hardest questions. But I came down to it being summed up in 3 words: unity, love, and happiness. Unity, it reflects both in the show and in the fan base, which is an incredible thing. Like the unity of all the characters, how Usagi wins over the bad guy and, makes them realize what they've done wrong, kind of thing. They all unite and become one, and that the fan base does the exact same thing. It reflects off the show, off the manga, off PGSM. It reflects off all versions. Same thing with love. Like her main point is always love, and you see that within the fan base, especially when you see up and new creators coming out. The amount of support they get from veterans or just fans in general of FanWorks, they're there with all the love and support they can provide. It's really incredible to watch. And happiness is the happiness that our characters have, or the characters have, and the happiness they give us. Like when I watch Sailor Moon, I am the happiest girl in the world. You know, nothing can slow me down that day, kind of thing. So that's about it.
Awesome. Daikon, what about you?
I was very worried I was gonna have to go after Flora because I have heard her talk about what Sailor Moon means to her so many times that I was like, whatever I answer is gonna be like, just it's not gonna measure up. And you know, obviously it's still not, but I do reiterate kind of the points that she underscored, and I loved what Kao said about happiness and unity, and I definitely think that and love, and I think that that's very true. I will say for me personally, and this goes all the way back to like little baby Daikon first watching Sailor Moon in 1995, like I am here for the Usamamo ship. That is like fundamentally the thing that kind of brought me into the fandom to begin with. Like I think it was really the first thing I ever shipped, and I was very dedicated to like, are they going to get together? Is this going to be a thing? And I didn't get to find out that they did get together until like when I was 15 because of the way that the anime was released in the US and on public access, and we didn't have cable and blah, 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 blah. But for me, that's a big part of it, is this relationship between Usagi and Mamoru, but then also like the deeper that I get into the fandom, there's relationships that Usagi has with the other Senshi, and that they bring so much value into her life. And especially coming kind of back into the fandom right as a global freaking pandemic hit, and getting to kind of form bonds with people in the fandom. I would say, I guess, interpersonal relationships are really kind of the main thing that kind of I take away from the Sailor Moon fandom, and the importance of having those bonds and support.
That's a great answer. Jacket, how about you?
I mean, I would say it's changed a lot for me. Sailor Moon has been a huge part of my life for almost 25 years now. And, you know, when I was little, it was the show that I loved, that I watched after school every day. And as I got a little bit older, it kind of helped foster my love of Japan and Japanese culture. But as I've gotten into adulthood, kind of like what Flora said, it's really shaped how I try to view people. We just finished watching, my husband and I, Sailor Moon S, and we watched the episode 125 where Sailor Moon saves Hotaru by giving up the Holy Grail. It's like the decisions that she makes in that episode are objectively wrong. Like, she should not have done what she did, but she saw that this person had value, that every person has value. And so I try to take that into my everyday life. Not always great at it, but and also as an adult, this has been my biggest sense of community that I have, is the Sailor Moon fandom. So, I mean, it's a huge part of my life still, even though I have stepped away a little bit from it, but it's still just, it's a huge part of my life, and it always will be.
That's amazing, and I can definitely relate to the sentiment about some of the decisions that Usagi decides to make, such large leaps and sacrifice that she decides to do. And I think it's speaks to the savior complex that some of us have, where we want to save everyone because they are worth saving, sometimes to our own detriment. So hopefully the next question is a little bit easier. I know that Z does not like to pick favorites. I don't like to pick favorites either. But I think it's interesting. So I'm going to kind of tack on to this question of who's your favorite Senshi, but I'm going to add an additional question on there, because we all tend to pick our favorites, but I also want to know.
Oh shit! Wait.
And it kind of leads into the next question. So I'm going to start with number 2. Who is your favorite Senshi? And we're just going to go down the line. We'll start with Kea.
I'm definitely going to go with Haruka, because in all honesty, I just got a big old crush on her. I mean, her personality is, it's just, the second I saw her, I'm like, I'm going to marry someone like that. And lo and behold, I did. No, it was, not only did I find her like immensely attractive and how she went back to male and female, didn't really have a significant identity. I adored that about her at a young age. I didn't understand it, but I was there for it. And her personality just spoke to me in a way that I could really get along with someone like that.
Very nice. And I translation was not kind to us here in the U.S. because the translation of, you know, her having the personalities of both genders being translated to she is both genders led to a lot of fan rumors and fanon that, you know, she was a hermaphrodite and stuff like that, which led to so much discourse and explanations as to why she's a male and a female, and that she was like one of the starlights and was able to transform from male to female was very interesting. So.
I remember that time. I'm glad it's all cleared up now, because that was a heck of a debate between the fandom.
Oh my gosh, it caused so much discourse. Flora, favorite senshi?
I mean, UglyGreenJacket and both know this to pieces, but yeah, it's definitely 100% Usagi. And like, not only for the goodness, but also for her realness. Like, in the way that she is allowed to suck at everything she does, and it does not define her worth at all. Like, she's not a hustler, she's not a calorie counter, she does none of the things expected of people who have the same gender identity as her, especially not in Japan. And she makes it to queen. Like, so yeah. Interestingly, I do like her more now than I did as a kid. When I was a child, Hotaru was my favorite, who very much more fits the mold of the kind of person you're supposed to be, at least my generation, when you're a little girl. But yeah, as a kid, I didn't want to be her, although I'm a lot like her, because I very much still ate up the narrative of all the ways I should be, but wasn't. And now that I've embraced myself, I love her fully.
Very good. I love that answer. Daikon, what about you? Favorite senshi?
Honestly, it depends on like the filter through which we're viewing favorite. Like, my favorite to write is definitely Minako. She is such a trip. She is just hilarious and so easy. Like, she comes very easily when I'm trying to write her. Personally, I'm the most like Makoto. And I agree with Flora. Like, how do you not love Usagi? So like, I know that's probably not the best answer, but like, pick one of the three, and on any given day, it could be them.
That's very. I definitely agree with some characters being easier to write than others. The Minako character is definitely easier to write for me. So I think that's I like that correlation there. And Jacket, what about you? Favorite senshi?
Well, I've always been kind of boring and drawn to the main character, probably because I wish I had main character energy and I just don't. I am an extremely introverted person, so I was always drawn to Usagi because I think she was the complete opposite of me. She's not the easiest to write for me. Mamoru is the easiest to write for me because he's the one that I relate to the most. But I just loved Usagi's energy and her light, and she just brought goodness to the world. And how can you not be drawn to that in some way as a person?
Right. Z, I know we had this discussion in our first episode, but for our guests, can you tell them your favorite senshi?
Oh, good gracious. I can't even remember what I said last time.
It always changes. It's never the same.
It sincerely does change. It kind of depends on the mood and how I'm feeling. I want to say I said Sailor Jupiter, but I was specific with my version of Sailor Jupiter because I like different versions of the different senshi depending on what form of media that they're in. So specifically, I really like Sailor Jupiter within PGSM because I love her character. I love how she is. I love her transformation sequence. She's just great. She's wonderful. She's magnificent. And I love her character arc within PGSM specifically, and she was a character that I really could deeply relate to when I started watching PGSM specifically.
Okay. And Lumi, what about your favorite Senshi?
You know, I'm gonna have to show up for my favorite girl out there, Miss Saturn. She is that bitch in the knee-high, lace-up purple booty heels. But no, for real, I love her so.
Oh my goodness.
But no, for real, I love her so much, especially because of her character and the character growth that she goes through, especially, you know, when she's struggling with her sickness, with her father, and then Mistress Nine. Lord, Mistress Nine. Oh, love Mistress Nine as a character. I just love that whole thing with her so much. I forgot what her name is. And Hotaru. Hotaru is her name. I love Hotaru so fucking much. Oh, that's my girl.
I get this we get this question a lot, especially when we are live on TikTok. And my answer changes a lot too. I tend to like the main character. Like I'm like I like Usagi. I like the Miss Universe answer in the Sailor Moon community is I like the main character. I like Sailor Moon. I like Usagi. I think during our first episode I mentioned that I liked Sailor Moon not just because she's the main character, but I think in a sense that she does represent qualities that I don't necessarily have in myself. I myself am an introvert. I have really bad social anxiety. So Usagi exhibited a personality that I wish that I did have. But I feel like her principles, some of the choices that she makes reflects on who I am as a person, or the person that I want to be. Like I would like to think that when, you know, the hard choice comes, that I'm able to make those type of decisions confidently, without any type of remorse, because I know it was the right thing to do. So I think that Sailor Moon in her specific moments of courage and maturity speak the most to me, more than the clumsiness and the laziness that Usagi exhibits. So I think it's always interesting to see the dynamics between Usagi and Sailor Moon specifically. So I think those are great answers. So yes, we all have our favorite Senshi. But in my next question, I asked, who do you resemble personality-wise? What Senshi resembles you as a person? And we'll start with Kao.
Definitely Makoto, Jupiter. Tall girl problems. Girl, I get it. It's not easy being tall. But no, her whole personality, the dreamer aspect in her loyalty to Usagi, her strength to be so independent considering her parents are gone, and not kind of filtering on that, is what I adore so much about her, and that I see a lot of myself in that as well.
Very nice. And Flora, how about you?
Again, 100% Usagi. My husband is sitting next to me. He chanted Usagi when you were saying this question. But yeah, like all the way. And in all my ADHD ways, I am Usagi. Especially with the crap she's not good at. But also, again, this is absolutely tied with the fact that I was very young when I fell in love with the show, and she shaped me a lot in all my views in how I want to approach people, how I do approach people in my line of work now. So not only, I'd say this goes both ways. I think I am a little bit like her because I want to be. and because she shaped me this way.
Daikon.
Yeah, so I kind of touched on this in my answer to my previous question, but I'm definitely the most like Makoto. I'm a little bit romance crazy. I like to take care of plants and bake cookies and so on and so forth. But also, if you make my friend cry, I will beat your ass. Like 100%. I am very much the person who is like, oh my God, you upset somebody. That is not okay. Da, 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 da. And then I have to like walk it back and be like, okay, but what would Usagi want me to do? Okay, let me let me choose the kind option and not resort to violence as the the solution to my problem. So yeah, I relate to Makoto. Sorry, Lumi, what did you say?
Oh no, I just said you better than me.
Oh yes, we had a full conversation before we started recording with Lumi, and Lumi. We'll get to Lumi in a minute. Jacket, what about you?
So I don't really relate to any of the senshi very well. Mamoru has always been the one that I have kind of related to the most. Again, I'm a huge introvert. I'm not very good at peopling. That's what FloraOne just called it. So he's always just kind of been the one that spoke to me. And I just loved how he supported Usagi. So, that's not a very exciting answer, but he's always just been the one that I've related to the most.
And that's perfectly fine. And I definitely appreciate the answer. And I think the username says it all, too. So,
yes, that's true.
Z, how about you? I know we talked about this before, but I would love for you to share with us.
Oh, goodness. Okay. I feel like I'm a mix between two characters, Makoto and Ami-chan. I'm a fairly quiet and reserved kind of person. But at the same time, I don't mind speaking my mind and standing up for what I believe in. Depending on the situation, I'll analyze it. And especially when it comes to Makoto's femininity, depending on the episode and stuff, when it's discussed, I feel like I relate to that super duper deeply. And I'm gonna leave it right there. But primarily Makoto and Ami-chan. Those are the two senshi that I relate to, that I feel are my personality. In your guns.
And our very own Sailor Saturn, our destructive one, Lumi.
Yes.
You did not just call it destructive. You did not just call it destructive. I'm gonna come for you. I'm gonna come for you for that. Anyway.
The silent wave is coming.
I'd say, well, are we talking about in general or who we most like? Because in general, it's a little much.
So I honestly, I would say on an even keel, on a good day, I'm not saying at your worst moments, but just in general, as a person, who do you feel resembles you personality-wise?
I'm gonna say either Usagi or Minako. Usagi, I feel like Grayson knows why. Grayson has a lot of experience why. Considering how I didn't properly do my homework earlier. I really did.
My goodness.
I thought I did, and I didn't. But if we talk about in general, for one person, I'd probably say either Minako or Usagi. Minako, because I'm really like Minako. I'm really driven by my fantasies. I'm super duper into romance, but at the same time, I'm like Usagi, where I'm just tee, and I'm also extremely ditzy. So,
Yes, I would have to say that Lumi is definitely the Usagi / Minako of our group. She forgets our schedule. She forgets the homework that I give her. She's
it was unintentional.
Turning in things last minute. I asked for Z and Lumi to provide an audio clip of their favorite. I got that from her yesterday. Was Z turned it in the day after I asked. So just
Sorry.
to give you an idea of what I deal with, it's like she'll message us on Discord and say, when are we recording again? Isn't it on this day? I'm like, no, it's not on this day. It's on a whole different day.
But we love Louie.
We love Louie.
To be fair, the last time I messaged that, I was trying to double check because I saw for the 25th of March and for February, but then I looked back and I saw something about March 9th and I was like, hold on, I don't remember no March 9th. So I had to confirm. That. But to be fair, I've gotten better about that.
Yes, and dyslexia is real because it's March 6th. Not that.
Oh.
Screaming.
Right. So yes, we all have a taste of how Lumi is, and for me, the senshi that I feel like fits me personality wise, and I said this in our first episode, is Sailor Pluto. I feel like I think like her solitude speaks to me I think she relates to me too much. I think it's one of the reasons why Pluto is near and dear to my heart. She reflects me a little bit too well. We're both Scorpios. I think that solitude has been a major proponent of my life, especially growing up. So I think that plays into my introversion, where I am okay being by myself. I enjoy quality time alone. But I know that the same as Pluto, there is that longing to belong, a longing to be a part of something greater and bigger than myself, and a sense of responsibility, and also being the oldest of our group because I am 38.
Well. Damn.
So yeah,
bro,
I think
you are old as my mom.
Dang.
Oh, my heart. It hurts so bad right now.
That's a compliment. No, that's a compliment because my mom's 38.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're good here in the 30s.
Yes, it definitely feels good to be around my age group because I'm like, should I still be involved in this in some capacity? Because I'm in like my late 30s.
Definitely has no expiration date. So
Facts. Utter facts.
Yes. So I think that we have all touched on this in some capacity. But I would like to get dive a little deeper into this, and I want to know how you got into Sailor Moon. And I just want to preface this with, I never really thought of this question until I met Z, because when I first talked to Z, she told me she watched PGSM first, and it blew my little brain to pieces because I was like, how did, and it just changed my perspective of how people are engaging with Sailor Moon now, because for people my age, it was pretty linear, but now, especially now, that linear model has changed, and there are several different paths to Sailor Moon. So, Kao, how did you get into Sailor Moon?
Pretty much the typical 90s kid story. I saw it one day and then I was just absolutely mesmerized by it. Like, there was no turning back for me at that point. I just got sucked into the mystery of it all, and I will never ever forget seeing it in Japanese for the first time on one of those really bad bootleg VHS tapes. I'm certain it was the Supers movie, because all the new characters in Sailor Moon's super outfit just freaked me out. I'm like, what is happening right now? I need to know more. How do I get my hands on this? What do I do? And of course, nothing was available, but I was just so almost like starstruck, I guess. Is the right term? Probably not. But
which one? Was it the one where they kidnapped the children, or was it the one with the ice whip?
No, it was the one where they kidnapped the children.
Oh my god!
And it was the first time. I know, it's so good. It's the first time I saw Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and I was like, just, what is happening? As a child, my brain just blew up. But ever since then, I've been trying to I have this fascination with finding new things of Sailor Moon still. it's still an ongoing thing for me, even though pretty much everything is out there. I actually have a dedicated Pinterest board where I go and search for images that are rarely ever seen. I'll have to show you guys sometime, because I guarantee you there's going to be a handful of pictures you've never seen before illustrated.
That makes so much sense now when you showed that picture in the Discord.
Yeah.
So I was like, why is this a thing? And now it makes so much more sense. So I definitely appreciate you telling us that.
Yeah, no problem.
Flora, what about you? I know you touched on this briefly, but yes, I'd love to hear your answer as well.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely a 90s kid, but with the distinction that I was the Sailor Moon 90s kid in Germany, and in Germany it was a whole different story than in the US. We were a lot luckier than you all in the US. Our translation was better. We had all seasons available from the start. We had truckloads of merchandise freely available. Like, there was fan clubs, there was an official bi-weekly magazine that we had when I was little. And yeah, basically, in being a 90s kid in Germany, you could not escape Sailor Moon. Like if anyone from my generation now, everyone will know it for sure. Weddings in my generation at 2 a.m., everyone will howl the German techno beat theme song from Sailor Moon from the 90s.
I think that's the answer provides so much more perspective to especially to us US fans, because I think that because it was the access for us was so limited, our biases are like basically informed by our own experiences, and we try to glean information from where we can. So
yeah, I do not envy you.
What tends to happen though is that we tend to put our opinions and perspectives onto other countries, and we also diminish ourselves in that way as well, where it's like, oh, because there's a lot of backlash for the geek dub here in the US now than there was ever before, given how censored it was, given the FCC rules and everything like that, and Germany and Mexico were known for being pretty much faithful adaptations of the original Japanese source, whereas countries like the US, Korea, or just to name a couple, were known for heavily editing and censoring the Sailor Moon content because they felt it was not appropriate for the audience that they were showing it to. So I think that's very...
the worst was Italy, I feel. By far the worst was Italy, where the starlights were the three lights, twin sisters that magically swapped places, because we can't have anything that looks like a trans person on a kids show. So that was Italy for you.
Right. And us in the US never got a Stars dub until recently. So it's like, it was just an impossibility. Even as we became more informed about the Japanese dub, and we've seen the Japanese version of Stars, we knew in the US, because of the way the media was, the policy and procedures of media, it was like, we knew the Star season was never going to happen. There was no way to plausibly explain it in a way that would be acceptable to younger kids, especially the last episode. So I think that's very interesting to see that other countries have made that decision, or even they either forego the Star seasons altogether, or they heavily edited it. So very interesting to see.
Well, that was unless you had access to YouTube, where they would post it in the Japanese sub, and they would post it in the 3 parts and a little playlist.
Right. Well, and specifically for us 90s, late 80s, 90s kids, there was no YouTube.
Oh
no, you did not.
There was no YouTube.
YouTube didn't exist yet, did it?
It sure didn't. We wish there was a YouTube back then. Daikon, what about you? How did you get Miss Anne?
Yeah, for me, it's been honestly very kind of cyclical. I'm about to give you all the information you need to figure out exactly how old I am. But so I first started watching it like right when it was initially airing the Deke dub on like public access, like antenna TV. And I don't know if I like saw the very first episode or like very early in the series, but like I became completely obsessed, and I'm now a morning person, but I absolutely was not as a child. And I would wake up early on Saturdays, like specifically to watch Sailor Moon. And like my parents knew how serious about it I was and how into it I was. And basically all I got through the public access was most of season 1. Like I didn't see the finale of Classic until I didn't see the actual unedited version until last year. But I didn't get access to even the Deke dub of that until I was 15. In 2005, I discovered Sailor Moon fanfiction on the internet and brought me right back into the fandom. And I found like bootlegs of the Deke dub on eBay and like watched the whole thing through in like 3 weeks. And obviously it's just the first 2 seasons because it was the Deke dub. I never watched the Cloverway dub. And so I was really into Sailor Moon, and I watched PGSM and so on and so forth, like in my mid-teens. And then I found it again in like 2019, 2018, because once again, I found Sailor Moon fanfiction. And now I finally have sat down and watched all of the Viz dub and actually like, not that I couldn't have been a legit fan before, but like, there's a lot of trivia that you don't know about the series until you've actually watched all of it.
That's interesting. And honestly, it's the first time I've heard someone say that they have not watched the Cloverway dub.
Well, so I didn't have Cartoon Network.
Gotcha.
So like when they were airing it, I just didn't even have access to it. And then when I was old enough to make the decision as to whether or not I wanted to watch it, the voices were all different. And I was like, nah, fuck this. It's the same reason I didn't read the manga until they released versions of it where her name is Usagi, because I tried to read it and her name was Bunny. And I was like, this is stupid. And so I refused to read it.
Oh my gosh! Like that is so hilarious, because I was confused when I first started reading the Chicks comic / Tokyo Pop manga, and they were calling her Bunny, and I was like, who the hell is Bunny? That's not her name.
Like,
Literally
I'll accept Serena,
when I
I'll
was
accept
reading the
Usagi.
fanfiction.
Oh, sorry, Luby.
No, you're good. You can continue.
I was just saying, I'll accept Serena, I'll accept Usagi, but what is this Bunny thing and why?
Yeah, it took
Bunny
me a minute
was
to
the only
realize
change
that.
the German dub made. Bunny was her name in German.
Yeah, and it's a literal translation of Usagi, and we see the same thing in Princess Tutu, where they literally call
I
her
hate
Duck.
it there too. I will only watch the Japanese version of Princess Tutu because it completely robs the emotional impact of multiple scenes when we're dramatically yelling "Duck!" across the screen.
Listen, I'm not even gonna hold you. When I first watched Princess Tutu, this was like when I was a lot younger. I think this was like in 4th grade that I watched Princess Tutu. When I heard them scream "Duck," I was like, who the fuck is Duck? Because the playlist because here's the thing, when I was younger and watching YouTube, they had all these different animes in different playlists, and in some of the playlists they had the sub and the dub mixed up, so I would go from hearing Duck to her actual name in Japanese, and I'm like, who the hell is Duck?
Oh, gotta love localization. Jacket, how did you get into Sailor Moon?
So I first watched Sailor Moon on Cartoon Network. I actually have my brother to thank for that, weirdly enough, because I think Dragon Ball was on right before Sailor Moon on Cartoon Network, and then Sailor Moon came on. And so I started watching it and was completely obsessed with it. But at that point in time, all we had was the dub, and I think R wasn't even completed yet, so there was just like a tiny bit of R that they had dubbed.
Right.
So of course I turned to the internet And that's where I found fan fiction. And then I was reading these stories that had completely different names in them. And so it was just very confusing because anime culture, especially in the part of the country that I'm from, was not at all mainstream, 25 years ago. So like I got made fun of for watching Sailor Moon when I was little. So, the internet was where I turned to find everything about Sailor Moon. And then, my mind was blown that there's 200 episodes of this show that I love, but I have no access to it. So that's kind of how I got started.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to, yes, the Geek Dub Toonami. They only did the first part of Sailor Moon R, and then they finished it, and then they released it as the lost episodes of Sailor Moon on Toonami. It was hilarious.
Yes, there were 17 lost episodes. I
right.
That.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, the internet for what it was. We're talking about dial-up AOL back in the day, where the internet was a treasure trove, and you literally had to dig and figure out what was valuable and what was absolute trash.
Yep.
Fan fiction,
fan subs.
yes. And this is before the fan dubs and the fan subs even came out. This was just literally the internet at that time was not capable of hosting videos or even full episodes. It was literally 10-second clips were only available, and they were so low quality, but it was also the internet was free range, so literally people were making up stuff as they were going along. When I tried to research Sailor Moon, I stumbled onto this fan website, and it was called Sailor Moon X, and I was like, what is this? And in me and my confusion, I was maybe 15, 16 at the time. I had no idea that it wasn't even an official source, and that there was a Sailor Sun, and that there was a Sailor Earth, and Sailor Earth was Naru's little sister.
That.
Yes, and it was and I took it as canon because I was like, oh my gosh, Naru's little sister. I didn't know Molly had a little sister as Sailor Earth, and I didn't, and Sailor Sun, she had brown. She reminds me of Belle because she had brown hair and it was in a ponytail, and she's wearing this yellow sun costume, and it was for it being fan art, it was drawn really well. So I literally was like, oh my gosh, these are real characters. So it's very it was really hard to separate fact from fiction, especially during that time, because there was no official Sailor Moon website to go to back then, and if it was only in Japanese.
Just side note, Naru does have a little sister in canon, but only in one short story in the manga.
Exactly. But this was way before that even, I think maybe the manga had probably finished by then, so maybe that there is some correlation.
Yeah, that was the very last short story written for the manga. So
yeah, so I don't know if that, because it was maybe, gosh, I was 15, so it was what, 96, 97 at that time. So it's a possibility that they did get that information from there. But yeah, it was I'm very appreciative that fans nowadays have better access and better resources to find out more about the anime that they love, because for us 90 kids, especially in the US, it was very hard. So we talked about our favorite senshi, what senshi is most like us, how did we get into Sailor Moon, but what does the fandom mean to you? And Kao, I'd like you to start, and I would like you to talk about the official Sailor Moon fandom, as far as the community, how has it been for you as a part of the community, and how has it been for you as a FanWork creator, being in the community?
That's a bit of a tough one. I mean, I've met so many amazing people through this community. Some have become my best friends, and at one point one was the godmother of one of my children. It's incredible the kind of people you meet, and with what you put out as a creator, there's always going to be somebody who tries to take you down for it for whatever reason you have or they have, and it takes a bit of time, especially when you're new, to learn how to either ignore it or deal with them in an appropriate manner that doesn't escalate the situation. It's a bit of a learning curve in that sense, but aside from that, the community itself is just overwhelmingly amazing. There's yeah, I'm done. Sorry.
Did you have more to add to that?
What's that?
I said you said caught you out of the blue. That was one of our bonus questions from Flora. So
I know.
Yeah, so I try to put it on people's radars, but I know that it's kind of hard to put you on the spot. I didn't want to do that, so I do apologize.
all good.
Flora, since this is your question, I'm pretty sure you have an answer, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think you come into Sailor Moon for the show and you stay for the fandom, basically. Especially if you do something as elaborate as a hobby as writing or drawing for the show. And I think, I mean, especially fanfiction is a tiny world. And I feel like most people who come into fanfiction, especially for a fandom that's so old that the fan base and the community is much smaller, that you will make friends pretty fast with at least the fan group that started relatively around the time that you started. Like, you create your bubble, kind of, in a way. And I mean, Daikon and UglyGreenJacket are both one of my dearest friends each. And, like, this is something that you form over a shared love, a shared interest, and which to me is completely special, because most friends that you have in life usually are people who you're exposed to multiple times because you sit in a classroom with them, because you sit in a workroom office with them, etc. But rarely it's the case for people who share the same love and interests as you for something as random as a 90s anime. And like, these bonds are super special to me and are something that I can 100% say, if it weren't for the fandom, if it weren't for the communities, if it weren't for these friend groups, that I would not be here and writing in this capacity, and not making a zine in the way that we are, if it weren't for the fandom part of it. Because, like, I mean, I feel you're a fan of something that is something that mostly comes in waves. Like, I was a fan as a kid, and then it kind of mellowed a little bit. I didn't take part in fandom as much, but then it came back around Crystal. And it's with this about most things that you like in life, that they come in waves. And I would not still be here this long, 5 years in now, 6 years in now, in the fandom community, if it weren't for the fandom community.
That's a great answer, and I definitely appreciate the bonds that are made. One thing I did like in particular about reading your guys' work is that you guys collaborate with each other. You guys beta read. I just learned what beta read is. Thank you, Z.
You're welcome.
But it's like, I thought it was very interesting that you guys beta read for each other, as well as you guys inspire each other. So there's like some stories where it's like, oh, this story was written for FloraOne, and this story was written, for Daikon 1. So I think it was very interesting to see that crossover and the interaction and that you guys have with each other. I think that was very interesting to see.
You just gave me a huge flashback to when people used to make music videos for each other. Oh my god, it was so adorable.
Oh, what a time indeed it was. Oh.
Daikon, what about you? What does the fandom mean to you?
Yeah, I definitely relate a lot with what Flora said about kind of finding a little bubble. I have social anxiety and I'm shy. And so really the way that I even joined the fandom, I mentioned earlier that Sailor Moon has been very cyclical for me, and that I came back into it a couple years ago because of fan fiction. it was specifically Flora's fan fiction. I read, I can never say it right, but La Dolor Exquise, LDE, as I normally call it. And like became low-key obsessed with her and her writing. And we ended up kind of bonding in like the comments and the reviews. And, you know, she's a sex therapist and sex researcher, and I'm a sex educator. And we found that kind of shared interest. And from there, I kind of made friends with other people who she was already friends with in the fandom. And I sort of stay in my little insular bubble. Like, I know there's a lot of new people who have joined the fandom, and like, I appreciate the work that they're doing. When I have time, I like to try to read what they're writing and try to keep up with it. I love seeing new artists. And I also am like, I am shy and I don't necessarily like feel comfortable reaching out to like engage with you, but it is like, I appreciate seeing the fandom growing and new people coming and contributing to it. I just personally am kind of like, I'm going to stay here in my comfortable little bubble of people who I know and whom I love, and I will cheer on these other people from afar. But I'm glad that it is still kind of a thriving community. As y'all have said, 30 years on, that we still have people who are popping in because there's new stuff coming out and they're excited about it and they want to celebrate it.
Yes, absolutely. And I could definitely relate to the social anxiety and the shyness. So I think that it's important for, like, you know, us to come together and in a sense like this, where it not only shows our diversity, but also shows that, you know, there are ways for us to come together. I think that that's what the fandom like truly represents, is that, you know, whether you're shy or whether you're introverted or you're extroverted, that there is a place for you and you're allowed to take up space in this community and belong and feel accepted. Jacket, how about you? What does the fandom mean to you?
Well, like I kind of said before, the Sailor Moon fandom in my adult life has really been one of the biggest and best senses of community that I've had. And one of the things that I enjoy the most about fandom is it's 100% completely what you make it. You know, if you want to have a huge community, you can do that. If you want to just kind of curate the small space for yourself, you can do that. And so the Sailor Moon fandom has really given me space to be myself in a way that I can't a lot of times in everyday life, because, you know, we have to put on this facade and be professional, or, you know, all these different things. And so, you know, I met my absolute best friend in the world because of this. I am able to write because of, you know, it's meant so much to me in so many different ways. It's kind of hard to form it into one, you know, tight little answer, but, yeah, just the sense of community has been amazing. And even when I've stepped out for a couple of years and come back, it's always been so welcoming. So it's a really nice place to be. And I thankfully have not really had to deal with a lot of the more negative aspects to fandom. So, you know, creating that tight little bubble is really important and has been always a safe space for me.
I love you too.
Okay, that great answers across the board. I know that for me, the fandom has been a mixed bag for the most part. Sorry if I found the words. For some odd reason, like when my official place in the community is through TikTok. And when I started doing, and it was by chance. When I say I'm an introvert and I have social anxiety, like I literally only use social media to browse. Like I'm not really making content like that. I'm not in the front of the camera type person. I'm very behind the scenes. So I've, you know, I have a degree in graphic design, even though I don't do graphic design professionally, and I've always had this knack for creating things, like, you know, visually. And the one thing I noticed on TikTok is that there wasn't a lot of Sailor Moon content available to me, or at least in the capacity that I felt was like on par with what Sailor Moon meant to me. And I felt like people tend to focus on one side of Sailor Moon and not really take it as a whole. So I decided to start making videos, and one of the videos that I did went viral, and I was like, oh wait, no, that wasn't supposed to happen. But I did see that there was a need for people to be able to consume this content in a different way. So I changed my username to the Sailor Moon Guy, because I thought that was a very when I was thinking about the name that I wanted to go under, for the most part, the majority of the fandom is female. And to kind of like also like take a page out of, you know, my childhood, is that I got made fun of for liking Sailor Moon. Like I was supposed, you know, and it was like, you know, it was definitely a gender bias. It was definitely you should like Dragon Ball, you shouldn't like Sailor Moon, whatever. And it was just something that I was just drawn to. It wasn't because it was feminine or it was for girls. It was just a story. I'm all about the story, and I really like the story, even for what the deep dive did. So when I did my username for TikTok, I went with the Sailor Moon Guy because I felt like I needed to specify the fact that not only am I a Sailor Moon fan, but I'm also a man. And I have gotten backlash for that, like, you know, and being queer is also was also something that I caught flack for.
I hate that you had that experience, that you got backlash for both of these things. I absolutely hate it.
Yes. So, and it's very interesting, like how people choose to engage with you. And I think that Kao kind of like, you know, hit the nail on the head. Was like, when do you interact and when do you like disengage altogether? And unfortunately, TikTok presents a landscape where you can do either or. It's, do you have the capacity to deal with that? So, and for this particular instance, when I first started Sailor Moon Guy, I was like, I want to focus on not just one like the 90s Japanese anime is kind of like my bread and butter. That's where all my good content comes from. But I wanted to also focus on the musicals and PGSM and showing some of those iconic moments that you don't necessarily see on TikTok or social media altogether, because they tend to show the pretty side, the happy side, the clumsy side, and it's like, okay, you need to see these dark moments that happen in Sailor Moon, because unfortunately, and I think the deep dub in particular does not really give Sailor Moon a good reputation or credit for it being what it is. It boggles my mind to this day, like how people don't know what PGSM is, and I'm like, I had to remind myself that it is over 20 years old. But I posted this clip of Sailor Mercury, of Ami-chan transforming into Sailor Mercury from PGSM, and the discourse that came from that clip, because a lot of people were confused because they'd never seen PGSM before, and they were confused as to why the character didn't look like she did in the anime until she transformed. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where it's like what was acceptable or what was okay back then doesn't necessarily reflect today. And they were like, well, she doesn't look like the anime character, and this is weird, and this is different. And one person commented that they were like, I said, my comment is that Japanese culture is different, and that there are rules and regulations in place that keep you from dyeing your hair or wearing something outlandish. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but in places like school and government, there are all those rules in place where you have to conform to the standard. And this lady was arguing with me, saying that she grew up in the 80s and counterculture was a thing and people were dyeing their hair. And I was like, you're absolutely right. There was counterculture, and there were people that were dyeing their hair and wearing clothes that did not fit the standard because of counterculture. I wasn't disagreeing with her at all, but what I was telling her is that this was a kid's show, which meant that there were certain things that kids have to conform to according to the standard. But I was also saying it tends to be a haphazard thing that Americans do when they push American standards onto other countries. This person lost it. When I say lost it, it went from us talking about Sailor Moon to I am a pedophile, because I am queer and I like Sailor Moon. Like it took a hard left turn for me. And
hold the phone. Excuse me? Excuse me. No. We're not just gonna skim by. Oh, they're calling me. No.
But
no.
unfortunately,
names. I want names.
But that's not what we're here about. But my thing is that
names.
The thing
people go to extremes way too quickly when they don't understand the argument, so to speak.
Here's one thing though, because I think like this is something. I think, especially with TikTok and stuff, you're on a much bigger platform than in the small AO3 comment section, or even in the bubbles on Tumblr. And so you will always have assholes. The more people you reach, the more assholes there will be among that. And they always have reasons for acting this way because people aren't bad or good. But yeah, I do feel that this is a fundamental difference to like a crowd that is used to consume and comment and like treat you as this content creator who is not a person but someone on the internet and are horrible to you because of that. And a difference between if you're in a small organically grown community with people who know each other, relate to each other, talk to each other. And I will say, like, from the few things in the fandom world that have not been nice are always people who don't know you, are always the equivalent of what you had is this person commenting who are taking something you said in a way that you didn't intend it, because this is much easier when you're a screen name on a screen without a person behind it.
Exactly. And ultimately it was a learning experience for me. And even my followers, because I was following the trend of TikTok where I was responding to those comments, and it was stressing me out more than it was being helpful for myself. So I ended up like realizing that it was also responsible for me not only to disengage from my own mental health and safety and sanity, but also to create a safe space for those fans, because they were also experiencing discourse in a way because they were dealing with the elitist fans who feel that one dub is superior than the other, and you weren't allowed to like the deep dub because it was this and it's not like this now. And it was like, you can like what you like as long as you're not hurting anyone. It shouldn't be a problem, like, you know. And people appreciated that. Like, you know, I'm a self-proclaimed big brother of the Sailor Moon community, and a lot of people appreciate that as well, where it's like, I've even had some people say, like, you know, I don't have a really good relationship with my brother, so when you say you're my big brother, like, I actually believe it. And so it's people like that that make being a content creator worth it, because we're connecting in a different way that is more conducive to the fandom than engaging with those handful of people that are literally passing by. Like, they're not following me, or they don't know anything about my content or who I am, and they're just literally like passing by and just like spitting on whatever it is that I'm doing and then going on about their merry way. So it's a myriad of experiences, but the overall experience has been a positive one. Z, what about you?
What was the question? I was so intent on listening to everything that you were saying because I was just like, wow. And then I got really sad with the stuff you're saying as well because I can relate to that. But what was the question? If you don't mind repeating.
What does the fandom mean to you?
Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure that's what it was. What does the Sailor Moon fandom mean to me? Questions. Do I have an answer? I guess we're going to find out. I believe it was Daikon that brought up the 3 words when it comes to what Sailor Moon means to them. And unity, I feel, is a word that describes...
That was KO.
Oh, my bad. I knew it was someone. I had noted it. I was like, someone said this. Okay. I like the word unity being used. I feel like that's something that adequately describes the Sailor Moon community or the Moony community, depending on what you like to use. And I've been in different communities, like different spaces. So I actually started out on Tumblr. That was like my first introduction, honestly, to the Sailor Moon fandom. And it was interesting because I kind of saw more of the backlash kind of stuff when it came to the community on there. And I saw more of the negative things. So I tried to bring some positive stuff in there by making like Mama Chiba Week and Mama Usa Week and just kind of trying to be like Yuji, trying to show the positive things that Sailor Moon has to offer. And then, being a cosplayer, seeing how Moonies interact within the Moonie community with cosplaying is very unique, and it's such a... I'm trying to think of the word. It's inspiring. That's it. It's inspiring. The talent that people have, the skills that people share, and the overall emotion that drives the things that we do, whether it's with fan fiction, whether it's with AMV making, whether it's with cosplaying and trying to decide what fabric to use for a fuku because you stayed up till 2 a.m. trying to decide stuff. It's so magical. Or even making edits, like any kind of fan content when it comes to the Moonie community. I don't know. I feel like this is a hard question for me because describing community is a lot of things, and I think that's where intersectionality can come into play a little bit. So it's hard for me to pinpoint like what it means to me when it means like there's so many different facets I could go into. Like I could go into writing stuff. I could go into cosplaying. I could go into just general discussions and conversations that I've had. The friendships that I've made that to this day impact me in so many different ways. Like with G and with Lumi and with all my cosplay friends. Like it's like if I had to give a word, I feel like magical is what best suits it, because this community is like no other, sincerely. With any other fandom that I've been in, the Moonie community has truly saved me in so many different ways, and it's made me feel magical like nobody else. And now I'm done.
I'm now putting 2 and 2 together, but I think we have interacted on Tumblr. I think
we have.
We talked that last night. So.
We did. I was like, wait a minute, I recognize these usernames. Wait a minute, I know these people. I knew them from Tumblr.
I only know that you're saying it, but yes, absolutely. Hi.
Hi. I got so excited because I was reading through y'all's fanfics and I was like, wait a minute. Travel for Mama Usa Week? Wait a minute, I know these people. I got so hyped. I ended up crying a little bit after I told you about it. I was like, wait, I know them. Like, we used to do stuff all the time on Tumblr, and I remember reading all their things and da-da-da-da-da. I was an emotional mess. Call me sorry. I was
you absolutely started. he absolutely started traditions like Uzamama Week and stuff that it's still going. So yeah,
I'm so happy to
the
hear.
Sailor Moon fandom owes you.
Oh my god.
Oh, Z. Z was live last night on TikTok, and we were talking about today's, like, getting ready to record for today's episode, and she mentioned being familiar with you guys as writers, and I was floored to know that Z is a fanfic writer. And the fact that
I used to. Wait a minute.
and the fact that she started a trend that is continuing on. That was very, like, I was very impressed. I was so amazed that the connection, like, I was blown away.
Wait, Z, you started dramas for Uzamama Week?
Yeah, I started Mama Usa Week and I started Momo Chiba Week because I love Mamoru way too much and he deserves love. And I really love Mamoru and Usagi and they deserve love too. Yeah.
I feel like I shouldn't be here. I'm on a podcast with legends and I'm just over here like
no, I was sincerely such a baby because Sailor Moon, like, sincerely was one of the first few fandom spaces that I actively engaged with. So seeing people like Jacket and like Flora and like Daikon doing their thing, it was so inspiring, like, sincerely, and reading your works and seeing the discussions that y'all would have, like, it impacted me in so many ways, and I can't thank y'all enough. Like, I'm trying not to cry again, but like it's such an honor to be doing this with y'all. Like, I looked up to y'all. It's so wild.
Lumi, what does the fandom mean to you?
I don't know. I'm not even gonna hold you, homie. When I tell you I had like really bad social anxiety, like I think I said this in the first podcast, but I had really bad social anxiety growing up. So I talked to nobody about Sailor Moon. I still don't talk to people about Sailor Moon. I think the only time I started talking to people about Sailor Moon, I think the first person I actually talked to Sailor Moon with was Z. And that's when I had learned that, yeah, hi. That's when I had learned that they had watched PGSM first. But I've never really interacted with the fandom. The most that I would interact with the fandom when I was younger is I would just read Sailor Moon fanfiction with writers who don't even update anymore. I'm not even going to hold you. And then I would also, I don't know. Like, I kind of loved the fandom, but I also didn't really interact with it either because I was also on YouTube watching the little fan-made live actions and stuff. But I wasn't really ever talking to people in the Sailor Moon community. I kind of just really kept to myself. But with that experience, with what I have, just been observing and being a little lurker, smooth criminal. I would say it's a pretty united community for the most part. Like you said, G, there are those, elitists in the community, which there are going to be, but I don't know, Sailor Moon elitists are just a whole different breed, which is also why I don't interact with them, as a whole. So yeah, I don't even know. I can't even answer that question, homie. I can't, because I've never really interacted with them. It is, especially when you've never really interacted with the fandom itself. Because the most that, like I said, the most that I would do is I would just be a lurker and just peep with them big old little eye emojis, a little single one, not the little duo, but the little single one that you have to do little, sometimes when I be looking at you with those little two emojis, and I'm just That's literally me. So I'm not even gonna hold you. I can't answer that. I can't answer that.
It's fine.
Well, Lumi, I will say every fanfic author not updating does mean to update. It's just sometimes very hard.
No, I get it. Because listen, I used to be a fanfic writer for myself. I used to be pretty popular in the fairy tale community for my Nalu fics. So like I completely get it. Like, and especially like when I was younger, I would be like, hey, maybe don't haggle the writers because they also have lives and it's really fucking hard. Oh shoot.
Yep.
My language.
You're fine.
It's pretty hard to like keep up with the fan fiction, especially like keeping it up to date and maintaining it, keeping the story. It's hard. Especially if you end up like writing it for so long that you just end up not liking it. That's even harder.
Right. I agree. When we were doing our homework, I wanted to read Ours for Revenge by Daikon, but it was like I was going to read it for my homework, but it's 13 chapters, and I was like, no, I need to save this for another day when I can read it in full and truly appreciate it for what it is, rather than trying to read one chapter and be like, well, I started it. But I think it's a very hard question to answer when it comes to the fandom, because for some people it's limited, like the access is limited, or the communities, like the sub communities within the community, are so niche that sometimes you feel like you don't belong or you don't fit in, and you end up kind of like just observing in a sense where you're like, I'm just gonna see it from the outside looking in and kind of like appreciate it for what it is. Like and the fact that some of us feel like we're not allowed to take up space or allowed to interact, and it's self-imposed for the most part. I think it's like fear of rejection or also fear of not belonging because the people within the community are so seasoned.
Yeah, and again,
that's intimidating.
And again, I think there's this dynamic that often happens, especially like, remember I was saying how your fandom group, especially in the smaller type of fanfiction communities, your bubbles are usually made up of the people who were active at the time you started being active. And like with any friend groups, because we don't have unlimited number of friends, nobody has the capacity or even the mental space to have unlimited numbers of friends. You form bonds and then you form them, and then friendships grow into a different dynamic. And it's hard to come into a group that has already formed. And like, this is something like Daikon and UglyGreenJacket definitely can attest to. Like, we have this group of people that were active at the start when we were starting doing this, and coming in from the outside, this will feel like cliques, like set groups, because they all know each other and they're all comfortable with each other. And of course, nobody's entitled to someone else's friendship or time. It is much harder to get into this existing group. And so this, for me, I feel is the reason why there's lots of little split groups, why there's people who are then friends with the other people who started at the same time as them. And yes, if you're not part of this group, this can be pretty lonely. And especially if you're, of course, not in this group, don't understand this dynamic, maybe this will feel like people aren't like giving you the time of day or kind of excluding you, when what's really happening is these people have sat together for a long time. Right.
I can definitely relate to that because Sailor Moon Sacrifice was kind of like one of the official FanWorks that I like loved on YouTube, and this was over 10 years ago. And it was top tier content for me. And so for me, it was like just getting a reply from Kao on YouTube like sent me into like hysteria, because I was like, oh my god, it was.
Calm down.
I was literally fanboying over her over the content that they were creating, but I also felt that sense of self-imposed isolation, because it was like, who am I to say that I want to, like, I've had conversations with Kao where I was like, I literally got into video editing because of Sacrifice, and the content they were making, and I wanted to up my own skill set to be a part of the team because I believed in the work that they were doing. It was so good, and I just wanted to be a part of it in any type of capacity that I could. Unfortunately,
that brings me so much joy to hear that, because you're not the first person to tell me that you got into editing because of Sacrifice, but the fact that our project has inspired so many people to get up and go be creative in their own unique way, it's just a fantastic feeling overall, honestly.
Right. I agree 100%. And it was, and I think it was the one message I got from Sacrifice is that you can be creative however you see fit. Like, there's no limits or boundaries to keep you from creating. If you're not good at video editing, you can write. If you're not good at writing, you can draw.
Exactly.
You know, there's so many avenues that you can pursue to showcase your own creativity, and the community is accepting of that. You will find someone that will read your story. I'm not, and I think that when people tend to do it for the wrong reasons, like I want to have a whole bunch of kudos and I want to have hundreds of thousands of views, or I think that when that is your goal when it comes to your creative work, I think it tends to diminish the quality of the work that you're doing because you're doing it for the wrong reasons. So, with that being said, we talked about favorite senshi, we talked about what the fandom means to us, we talked about what characters, if we feel represent us as people. But going back to favorites, out of the official Sailor Moon universe, what is your favorite version? Is it the anime? Is it the manga? Is it Crystal? Is it PGSM? If you had to choose one, which would it be? Kao, go ahead and start us off.
For me, it will 100% always be the 90s sub, just because of that feeling it gave me as a kid. I'll never let that feeling go. I'm in my mid-30s now, and that feeling's still there pretty strongly. Deke will always be my second favorite, sensory and cousins aside. There's something so endearing about the horrible 90s puns that are just hilarious. I can't stop watching sometimes. There's a YouTube channel I go to often called Sailor Moon Says, and it's brilliant. You guys need to go check it out. But afterwards, I'd say musicals, because the music is just amazing. Manga, of course, because it's sourced. PGSM, I liked it for what it was. I wouldn't watch it again, because Plushy Luna kind of haunts my nightmares, but she does. And it was a good twist on the original adoption for sure. It was a very unique take on it, and I really appreciated it for that. And Crystal for me is dead last. I have my issues with it. I won't get into it, but when it boils down to it, it's a great thing that Sailor Moon is back out there for a new generation, and new fans are coming in every single day.
Well said. That's great, and I definitely appreciate the PGSM content. It was definitely a product of its time.
That's an understatement, but yes.
Yes. Flora, what about you?
Very specifically, and in the following order, the Star season of the anime, of the 90s anime, then Crystal, which I adored to pieces, and then the manga classic 3D.
Okay. I love that. Love the answers, and I like that. No, like I can appreciate this. The fact that none of the answers are going to be the same, and the fact that
for sure,
right? And I appreciate that, and I think that the community will appreciate that too. Where it's like there's no right or wrong answers when it comes to questions like this, and I'm hoping that people will realize that you can have your preferences and your likes and your dislikes, and you can still come together as a community. I think that's very important. Daikon, how about you?
So this is very much reflected in my fics if you read them, but definitely the 90s anime, specifically the first season, is sort of like my comfort zone, in part because for about half of my life, it was really most of what I had access to in terms of Sailor Moon and remembering it and thinking about it and processing it. As mentioned, I only finished watching the entirety of the anime about a year ago. So I didn't even see S or Super S or Stars until I was in my 30s. I read the manga for the first time, again, about a year ago. I have not seen Crystal yet, any of it. And I haven't seen any of the musicals. I did see PGSM when I was about 15. And it has problems and it's cute. And I liked at the time that I felt like there was more believable relationship development between Usagi and Mamoru than what we got in the Deke dub, where they went from screaming at each other to "and now we're in love" over a 2-episode period. But they do that better in the Viz dub for sure, and in the original Japanese, obviously. So my answer is sort of by default the 90s anime.
That's perfectly fine. Jacket, how about you?
My absolute favorite is the 90s anime. Specifically, Sailor Moon S is my favorite season. But as I've gotten older, I really love the manga. Just like seeing it in the form that it was originally intended and reading through it. Also, anime Mamoru is awful. Like, he's terrible. So I tend to turn to the manga when I want to have a better picture of his character, for sure.
That's really good. And I had a similar conversation with Cal like maybe a few days ago, and she was also talking about the different versions of Mamoru, and I thought that was very interesting. And I think it's I think what I do like about the different iterations is like how the characters are in each particular series. Like, but for me, the '90s anime is definitely a cornerstone for me. It's what I grew up with. I like the manga because of the growth. It's not like the '90s anime that has 200 episodes worth of development and filler that are able to kind of like establish those relationships and stuff like that. I think that it also shows that when the manga and the anime were written simultaneously, where the manga developed better in comparison to some of the anime. I like Crystal because it is an adaptation of the manga. It's not reaching me. It's like I'm like the S season Infinity arc is my favorite storyline. So if it's in any capacity, I'll like it. Crystal definitely has had its concerns. I think that's a good way to preface that.
The way I snorted just then.
But I think and the musicals, the one thing I like about the musicals is that it in itself is a fanbook. Because while it did adapt some of the main storylines of the series, when it finished, it started doing its own stories. And that was the one thing that Naoko did like about, that was one of the things that Naoko liked about the musicals, was the fact that the costuming and the fact that they introduced stories that necessarily weren't her own. So I think that that's very interesting. PGSM, I feel like any show that starts, it had to find its footing, and I like that by the time the actors got a feeling for the material, that the story, in a sense, found its footing, and they were able to kind of like push it in a different direction. It wasn't like a beat for beat of the manga. It started that way and then it diverged. And I think that was very interesting. Z, what about you?
My favorite. Yes, my favorite. I'm biased because it's what got me into Sailor Moon as a whole. It's PGSM. Like, I thought everything would be like PGSM, and I was wrong. And that's completely okay. But I love the storyline PGSM had. I am in love with the costuming of PGSM. I could talk about that for hours, but I won't. And I love the character development between all of the characters within the show. And I love the relationships that formed. And it showcased, you know, outside of their Senshi lives, they have civilian identities. And I love shows that do that kind of thing, that showcase the duality of having like this superhero, quote unquote superhero identity and a civilian life. I love that kind of stuff. And I love how nuanced PGSM is. There's so many beautiful conversations and discussions that could be had with just 3 episodes alone. So PGSM is my top favorite. I could go on for hours about PGSM. I love PGSM. Like I love PGSM. Next, I would have to say the musicals. Specifically, I'm a sucker for the first stage Bandai Muse. I love Anza. I'm biased as fudge, but I love Anza. I love the costuming. I love the songs. Like, you play the first few beats of La Moon, I'm gonna start dancing. You play the first few beats of La Soldier, I'm gonna start clapping. Like, I love the musicals. I have a preference for Bandai, but I do enjoy the NLK. I love the Kaguya Mew. I love the Super Live. I know that's not technically considered a musical, but I love the Super Live. It's all great. I love all the musicals. I could talk about those for hours too. Then I would probably go with Crystal, because Crystal was the next thing that I watched after I got into PGSM, because I was like, oh, there's more? There's not just 49 episodes of Special Act and Act Zero and a couple of side things? There's more to Sailor Moon than this? Interesting. But I enjoyed Crystal. Like, by the time I got into Crystal, it was still airing, so it was really cool to catch the rest of season 1, all of season 2, and all of season 3, and then waiting like 5 to 6 years for the Eternal movie. And now we got Cosmos on the way, which is so exciting. And then I'd probably have to put the 90s and the manga closer to the end. Not that I don't love them, but 90s isn't my personal fave, but I do enjoy it for what it is. And I love the art style. I love the songs and the music with it. I enjoy all of the voice actors and actresses, especially Mamoru's, because Kenji is phenomenal. But they're closer to the end if I had to like give a list sort of order. But I enjoy them all. There's just some that I enjoy a bit more than others. And I'm going to stop there, because then I'll start going on a tangent.
How about you, Lumi?
Me? So I'm not even gonna lie, my answers changed from the first time you asked me this question. So it's definitely gonna be the 90s sub. And then after that, it's gonna be PGSM, because I fucking love PGSM so much. Oh my god, I swore again. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry. I've been trying to work on it, and I'm so horrible at it. It just comes out.
You're fine.
But yeah, the 90s sub, then PGSM. As you know, I grew up with Deke, but you know, I'm kind of falling out of love with Deke. So then after that, I'm probably gonna have to say the Bandai musicals, because I am almost finished with the Bandai musicals, and then Crystal, and then, you know, Bond, and then the Deke dub.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Wait.
So
I forgot the manga.
You got more?
I forgot the manga. I forgot the manga. Hold on.
And where's the manga fit in that?
So it fits between the musicals and Crystal.
Okay.
Because I'm not even gonna lie, I did like the manga more than Crystal, but I can't decide if I like the manga more than the musical or not. I don't know. I'm having a love. It's a 50-50 right now.
Like Lost Soldier. I know start shopping.
Okay, so our next question is, did you get into fan work or did you start creating fan work first? And I'm going to answer this question first, and then I'll hand it off to Kaya. But I would have to say I got into fan work first. Sailor Moon X, for what it was, there really wasn't a lot of information. Like, it was mainly like character profiles and stuff like that, and maybe a story or two. But that was like my first introduction to fan work. Sailor Moon Sacrifice came after that, and there's been a number of fan work series on YouTube that I have seen or glimpsed at, but Sacrifice stood out for me because it was introducing elements in a way that tied to the original anime. Like, it wasn't so far-fetched. Like, it was plausible. That's one thing I love about Sacrifice. It was like it introduced elements in a way that was compelling and intriguing, and the character of Kurai, being Sailor Moon's sister, was phenomenal to me in that sense. When I decided to create fan work, I started with a role play. Actually, there have been several iterations of a role play. I am a role player / writer, and I always wanted to do a Sailor Moon role play, and I could never find a Sailor Moon role play that spoke to me. And I think that's also fan work in itself. And the concepts that were introduced for those role plays just didn't gel with me too well. Or the concepts seemed too far-fetched, or, it was just weird. Like, it was like, oh, well, Sailor Moon lives in a city in Florida. And I'm like, why Florida? I don't understand why Florida. Like, it just, it was like an Americanized Sailor Moon living in Oregon. And I'm like, I don't know how to feel about it. And some of the role plays that were out there were so expansive in a sense that it was overwhelming. Like, it was not just Queen Serenity. It was, Princess Serenity's father and her 3 little brothers, and then, Princess Venus and her brother and her father and her mother and their 6 siblings. I'm like, what? So much is going on. There was a really interesting roleplay that I really wanted to partake in. It was called Crystal and Queen, and it was a medieval take on the Sailor Moon fandom. I thought it was so interesting to see how these characters were imagined in a Game of Thrones-esque / medieval setting, and the name got me all together too. But I think, like, in any sense, when you see FanWorks, you also feel like, you can bring something different to the community, or different to the fandom, or especially the FanWork community. So I decided to make my own role play, and it was called Mare Serenitatis. And it was, the concept behind it was I wanted to create a Sailor Moon roleplay that wasn't set in Japan, that didn't focus on these characters being teenage girls, and I wanted them to be young adults / adults with jobs, careers, different ways of life, and being able to bring more maturity and ground these characters in a real life setting. And I failed miserably several times with this concept, and I've kept revisiting it because it was something I couldn't let go. And after the last failure of trying to establish a role play, and the reason it was so hard was because it was hard trying to get other writers or other players to commit to this huge reimagining of the Sailor Moon universe. So I was like, I'll write a fan fiction. basically got all of the stuff that I had written over the years through this role play and began laying the groundwork for a fanfic I call Lost Soldier. And it is a reimagining of the Sailor Moon universe set in Paris, France. And while these characters are in essence, the characters that we know and love, they are wholly different people. Like, the Usagi of my story is a ballerina with the Paris Opera Ballet, and it's like so different than the Usagi that we know. Like Usagi, a graceful ballerina, and it's like, how is that even a thing? And,
can't imagine.
The Mamoru of my story is like, he's a thief, but he's he's like a street racer, like almost like Fast and Furious type character. Minako, the Minako character, is a popular idol, much like she was in PGSM. Some characters stay wholly the same, like the Michiru character, whereas, some characters are, combined or omitted altogether because it just didn't fit with the overall flow. And also kind of like it's basically expanding the world in a sense where, I am introducing elements not just from the manga or the anime, but from the musicals, from PGSM, and even Sailor Moon Sacrifice. So I think it's interesting to see how people have their own perspective when it comes to their fan work, as well as the elements that they introduce into it. So that's just to give you an idea of how I started creating fan work and how I was introduced to fan work first before I started doing it. But what about you, Kale? Can you kind of answer the question of how, did you start with fan work, or did you create your fan work first?
Definitely started creating first. I've been drawing Sailor Moon, little Sailor Moon comics since I was a kid. I remember showing my dad, and he'd be correcting all my spelling mistakes. I'm like, thanks, Dad. How are my drawings, though? But I didn't really post any of my artwork growing up, nothing substantial anyway, with a name behind it. I didn't start actually producing for the internet until around 2007 or so, when YouTube was still pretty young. I noticed a lot of Sailor Moon AMVs were coming out, and people started kind of manipulating the animation a little bit. I'm like, what's that all about? What's going on here? So from there, I just watched and learned, and one day I posted this video with Sailor Moon Dark, and it was just supposed to be a joke. I found this Sailor Moon audio CD from the S season, I believe, and there was a Sailor Moon Dark character. So I slapped some black on Sailor Moon, I slapped that audio in, and it kind of blew up. It really, really floored me.
OMG, that was you?
That was me.
Oh my God.
I still have the video. I found it on some Polish website that had it archived. I have it. I'll have to post it sometime. But after that, I didn't really think much of it. I kept making my AMVs and stuff. And then one day, my friend and I, Brad, we were playing Fatal Frame. And we was at this really, really creepy part where this woman in the box comes out. And if you've ever watched The Ring, it's like Sadako from The Ring. Instead of a well, she comes out of a box. Anyway, that was happening, and my cat was freaking out upstairs. She ran downstairs and knocked over one of my Sailor Moon figures. And we stopped and looked at each other for a sec, and we're just like, hang on a sec here. We should do something with this. So not almost immediately, we started making this mock trailer from Fatal Frame and using Sailor Moon characters, right? And it turned out to gain a lot of popularity. And I was like, maybe we should, ride with this. So we started kind of shooting story ideas back and forth, and people were just all into it. And I'm like, why don't we just do something? People want to see it, let's do it. And we started writing the story, incorporating new characters, trying to figure out how we're going to make this a visual thing, because I didn't have the artistic ability at that age to animate and draw the way I do now. I mean, we're talking about a good 15-year difference at this point. But as soon as I put out the first trailer saying that we were going to make it happen, people just lost their minds. And more fan series started to pop out. It was an amazing time to be active on YouTube. It really was, because you saw all these people come out of the woodwork learning what we've learned and producing these amazing visuals. And I really, really appreciated the ones that you could tell put a lot of time and effort into it, because you could tell they had the care, right? And I don't know. After that, it just kind of, the rest wrote itself.
That's amazing. I love hearing the background behind Sacrifice. Like, I totally geek out on conversations like this.
Like I said, Sacrifice was a total fluke from the get-go. I'm not a fan fiction writer myself. This is my only one-shot story, so to speak. And yeah.
How about you, Flora?
There's the unmute button, sorry. Yeah, originally when you asked this question, I thought, like, yeah, definitely I was reading first. Who writes first when they read first? Like, literally, fan fiction was what taught me English language. Like, I sucked at English, grades 5 through 7, and then I fell in love with fan fiction, and I was fluent in English in half a year. But then I thought about it a little longer, and it really depends on what you count as fan fiction, because I was writing a script version of Sailor Moon Season 6 as a 10-year-old. That was exactly the quality you expect when a 10-year-old is writing it. But yeah, at that time I didn't know what fan fiction was. So I definitely was engaging fast, but not sharing it. And the sharing part is kind of a core for me to fan fiction. So yeah, I was definitely writing much later, and then reading fan fiction, not in the Sailor Moon fandom actually, but in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer fandom. I wrote my first fan fiction when I was 14 there, and then lots of other different fandoms under lots of other different pen names. Then one stunt of fan fiction that I'm not telling you. You will find it on the internet. Otherwise, I'm not telling you.
Oh man, now you gotta tell us.
Yeah, specifically when it comes to Sailor Moon fan fiction coming back, it was actually Crystal that sucked me back into this world. So much that I wanted more of it, and I don't specifically remember what was the first I read, but it did devour a lot, and my focus in what's definitely like canon compliant fan fiction. I wanted more of that world. I wanted more of the story, so it needed to be canon compliant. And I kind of read anything I could put my hands on fanfiction net in that time. And I don't remember what I was reading first, but I do remember when I found Antigone II's work, and that was what inspired a story in me that I wanted to write down, which was Ikigai. And in fact, it was kind of the same spark that you were mentioning, Grayson, in the way that I wanted a world where the story was updated. For me, definitely set in Tokyo, because that is part of Sailor Moon's draw. For me, that it is realistic depictions of Japan, which I love very much. But I wanted all the nostalgic bits that I loved from all the canon versions, but combined in a mature way that spoke to me as an adult. And yeah, so that's what Antigone II's work did, and a lot of other authors around her at the time. Like, none of us, obviously, who are here, like UglyGreenJacket, Daikin, and me, were writing at the time, so I was looking at work that was written before then. And yeah, so definitely reading always, in that sense, since I knew what fanfiction was what inspired me to want to do my own.
Right. I love that answer. And when I decided to write Lost Soldier, the reason why I chose Paris is because of its similarity to Juban District. And I wanted to introduce a more diverse cast of characters
Yeah.
in a more plausible way, where it's like, most people in Japan are Japanese. And that was the only reason of the setting
sure,
change. Yeah, it was the only reason of the setting change. And it also, like I did some heavy, like I read all my mangas over. I watched every episode of PGSM. I watched the musicals. I was on the Sailor Moon Wiki Moon, TuxedoUnmasked.com, just getting these nuggets of information that I wanted to incorporate in the story to basically just to be as compliant as possible, but also bring a updated, different version of these characters in the story. So I thought that was very interesting. And I was literally telling Z and Lumi in the Discord, I was like, one of the stories that I read by you and Jacket, I was like, this makes me want an adult Sailor Moon novel, like now, like right now. Daikon.
That is nice to hear.
Yes. Daikon, how did you get into fan work first, or did you start writing or creating first?
Well, I've kind of already answered this in terms of specifically Sailor Moon, but coming into the Sailor Moon fandom on the most recent iteration was definitely reading fan fiction, and it was actually Flora who kind of gave me the gentle push where she posted on Tumblr a fanfic prompt ask where she was like, I want somebody to write a version of the Makaiju arc where Mama remembers and Usagi doesn't, and she's flirting with Sujiro and he's like, what the fuck? And I was like, I have an idea. Hold that thought. And that then turned into R's for Reverse, which was my first major fan fiction that the world has access to. I
can't wait to read it. I'm really excited for that. So I'm literally excited to read it.
Well, I'm glad you didn't go, let me try to cram this in a short period of time, because word length comparable. It's about the length of The Hobbit. So you can read it in a day or two, but depending on your reading speed. But that's something that I kind of hold up as a badge of honor for myself, is I wrote something that's the same length as The Hobbit. But I did back in the day, similarly to Flora, and no, we definitely didn't know each other back then, but my first intro to fanfiction was actually also Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I started watching it and my mother was like, this isn't appropriate for somebody your age, and wouldn't let me watch it. So I would go online and be like, where can I find information about this? Because I really was into it, and that was how I found fan fiction to begin with. And then for 8 years, I was writing my own self-insert Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan fiction that, thank God, was never posted online and nobody has access to, because that is horribly embarrassing.
Yep, welcome to my life.
But that was sort of my very first, baby's first fan work. I know before we started recording, and I assume that this might come back around, but Lumi was like, how are y'all such good writers? And the answer is, we've been doing this for a long time. That is the answer.
Right.
100%.
I agree 100%, because it's it takes me back to AOL days when I was only watching Deke Sailor Moon and had no knowledge whatsoever, and I was in this role play, and I was playing a Sailor Mercury character, and she became Princess Mercury, and she had a Mercury Sapphire, and so it was so outlandish and so cringy. But it was the beginnings, it's I could say 25, 30 years later that I have improved greatly since then.
Yeah, you have to learn what you want to write, and you have to learn how to write it. And the only way to do that is by writing. There is no way to just jump to and now I'm good at it.
Right. Jacket, what about you? How did you get into fan work first, or did you start creating fan work first?
So I definitely got into reading first. I'm going to age myself here, but I used to keep copies of all my favorites on a floppy disk that was kept in my room under my pillow so that no one would find it.
Was it the different color floppy disks?
Oh yeah, yes. I think it was bright red, if I remember correctly. So So I read fan fiction for years. I didn't write anything until I was 27. So that's when I started writing, was in 2017. So yeah, I didn't write when I was little. Sailor Moon was really the only fandom that I had ever been involved in. And my only involvement was reading. That was all I did. I never commented. I never left reviews, nothing like that, until I read Ikigai by FloraOne, and I just happened to leave a comment. Something about it moved me to leave a comment, and that was kind of the rest is history for me as far as that goes, because she encouraged me to write, and I kind of figured out, oh, like maybe I do have some stories to tell, and that people might want to read them. So that's kind of how I got started.
Okay. I love these answers. Like it's honestly very validating for me. Law Soldier is a very ambitious project that I'm working on, and the one thing I am learning as a writer is to take my time and to be okay with making mistakes. I think it's something as a perfectionist when it comes to like my art or when it comes to writing. Like I am very hard on myself. So like just hearing these answers is very validating. Z, you know, since I recently discovered that you were a fanfic writer, you know, did you get into FanWork first, or did you start writing or creating it first?
I'll say specifically for Sailor Moon, I read fanfics first, because most of the fanfics that I wrote, they were back in middle school and they are cringy as heck. But I primarily wrote for Kingdom Hearts or on High School Host Club, stuff like that. So the thought of even potentially writing Sailor Moon fanfics was not in my mind until I discovered them, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually a thing that exists. That is wild. And I got so excited. But I actually read a lot of Sailor Moon fanfics first when it comes to Sailor Moon creating, in regards to writing. But I feel like I probably stumbled more into the cosplay side of fan creation of making Sailor Moon things first over writing. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna add on to that because you don't give yourself enough credit, Z, because because you have written Sailor Moon fanfic before, haven't you?
I don't think I have. Like, if I did, it was a one shot and it never got posted.
Okay, but I know that we mentioned earlier that you did the Tumblr trend for Usa Mama Week and the Mama Chiba Week, right?
I did.
So can you kind of elaborate on to as like why you decided to do that, and as well as like the interactions that you got from that, and kind of like how you when you stepped away that it continued. Can you kind of like, we talked about it last night, but can you kind of like elaborate for our guests today?
Yeah, of course. So I started Mama Usa Week first, if I'm not mistaken. And I was sincerely inspired off how on Tumblr, a lot of ships had weeks. Like, specifically, I remember there was a Death the Kid and Liz ship week, which I think it was Lid, I want to say. There's a lot of ship names for Soul Eater characters. And I was like, does Mamoru and Usagi have one? Because I really loved Mamoru and Usagi. I loved their relationship. I loved their dynamic. And I was like, do they have a ship week on Tumblr? And I discovered that they didn't. So that's how Mamo Usa Week came to be. Just the idea that there's other ship weeks and there wasn't one for Mamoru and Usagi. And I love their relationship. And I know that the Mooney community on Tumblr was everything, because I remember reblogging so many different fan arts of Mamoru and Usagi, and some fanfics and drabbles as well. And I was like, I want to see the things that people can create based upon verbiage and things that I give. When it comes to Mamo Chiba Week, that I specifically started because I love Mamoru way too much, and I just kind of felt like, at least I'll say in the corner of the fandom that I was in, he was getting crapped on a whole lot, for lack of better words. Like, I just didn't see a whole lot of appreciation for his character. He's such a deep level character, and I feel like a lot of people really only analyze him at the surface. So I thought it'd be a cool thing to do to give him a week where we get to see all these different themes that revolve around him, and to see the way that other people perceive said themes. Because they're weeks, both Mama Usa and Mama Chiba, their weeks, how I planned them, they were always their birthday weeks, because I thought that was cool. And when it came to interactions, everything was so positive and so cool. And it got to a point where eventually I would ask people if they had recommendations or suggestions for themes for the following year. And people would often leave, like, in the little Q&A box that you could do on Tumblr, like, their ideas and suggestions and stuff. And it was overwhelmingly positive, and seeing all the fan art and the drabbles and the one-shots and the stories and the conversations that people would have when it came to Mamoru and Usagi and just Mamoru alone, it was so wonderful. And it genuinely makes me so happy to know that it's something that still continues to this day, because I ended up having to stop it because, for one, I'm not on Tumblr like that anymore. Like, I actually deleted my whole account and everything. And then on top of that, like, I was getting into college, so I definitely didn't really have time to continue that. So it makes me really happy to know that somebody else has decided to, you know, pick up the torch and keep it going. Like, that actually made my whole night when I saw Mama Usa 2022. I was like, wait, people are still doing that? Oh my gosh, I love that so much. It was such a nice little trip down memory lane, because it reminded me of some artwork that I think I ended up, like, submitting for Mama Chiba Week. So I was like, oh, I could finally participate in something that I made years ago. That's interesting. Because I want to say it was Mama Chiba 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I created those 2 weeks sincerely just because, at least on my end of the Mooney community fandom, I just wasn't seeing a whole lot of positivity. And just seeing how other fandoms had themed weeks, I thought it would be cool to bring that into Sailor Moon, and with Mamoru and Usagi specifically. And it turned into something beautiful that still continues. And it makes me so happy. And I'm honored to be among people that have actively participated in said weeks. Like, it's so magical.
That's amazing. And Z, you have influenced not only cosplayers but writers as well. So it's just your influence knows no bounds, and I'm very proud of you.
And it makes me want to cry again. Because I get so shocked. I really do. I get so shocked when people say stuff like that, because I don't think that. I'm just like, wow, people are so cool. Like, dang, they're doing all this wonderful, fantastical stuff, and they have all these stories, and they got all these cool cosplays, and da-da-da-da-da. And then they want to pull the Uno reverse on me. Like, wait a minute, we're not talking about me right now. Hold on.
Right.
When we talk about really talented people, we do talk about you, and you're just like, no, and then we have to like Z, and you're just arguing with it, and it's like, stop arguing.
But you know what's funny?
That's
is
crazy.
that the one thing the one common thing I've noticed amongst a lot of the creators, like, you know, fan work creators, or, you know, collectors, or resource information people, is that they all have this sense of modesty and humility when it comes to their contribution to the Sailor Moon community. So I think it's more common because it's like, oh, I'm just little old me. Like, honestly, I felt the same way about my TikTok. It was like, people were like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. I'm like, this is all right. Like, it's not like my friends are like, oh my gosh, you have like 40,000 followers. I was like, don't remind me of how many followers I have, because it sends my social anxiety into a riot, because
It's scary.
it's scary.
It really
It's so
is.
scary.
Yeah.
It's very scary. And, you know, honestly, I like being able to share with the community, and interacting with my community is it's very gratifying. Like, aside from making the edits, it's being able to interact with other Sailor Moon fans and share that same love because I don't have a lot of friends in my real life that have the same level of, you know, adoration for Sailor Moon. So it's kind of isolating in a sense, where it's like, I feel sometimes, you know, have you seen like those videos where they show that it's a person, and it's like a 2-person video, and they're talking about something that they love, and the person that they are talking to is interested in what they're talking about, like truly interested. And sometimes I don't feel that way with my friends because, one, they don't know anything about it, or they have a limited knowledge about it, and they don't have the same appreciation for it. So you sometimes you feel like, oh, I have this really cool thing. Would you like to see? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, okay,
You know what?
And
It's funny because like I'll be like, I go to my husband like, look what I made. He's like, cool. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks, love you too.
Thanks, appreciate it. It was nice.
So yeah,
My husband hasn't read any of my fic because he's like, I don't know enough about the characters.
Nothing.
Yeah.
That's
so
an excuse.
right. So we talked about like, if you got into fan work first, or if you started creating fan work. Lumi, what is your experience with fan work?
So,
I'm excited for this.
oh god. So my experience with FanWork was it's a little bit of a rough timeline. Because after I finished like Sailor Moon, and then I think a little bit of Sailor Moon R. Yeah, it was Sailor Moon and Sailor Moon R. I was like, And I was like, what anime I like with Tokyo Mew Mew? And then I got into Full Moon, and then I got back into, I did watch Full Moon. Wait, was it? Yeah, it was Full Moon. And then I got back to Sailor Moon, and I was like, I want to watch some like Sailor Moon content. So the first one that I can recollect is that there was a lot of Sailor Moon like cosplayers, but they were more specifically doing like live action versions of, or like twists, I guess, on like the first season or like the very first episode. So it was like it started off with those, and then there was this one that like never really actually finished the episode. I don't know if you guys know it. I have to like search up and figure out what it was, because I've been looking for it for the longest, and I don't think it's up on YouTube anymore. I think she deleted it, or they deleted it. It was like what was it? It was like the first like maybe like 2-3 minutes of the episode. Of the first episode, like where Usagi is running across the street, she's trying to get to her school, and then she comes across Luna for the first time, and then it transitioned into like where it was like, oh, there's a Yoma, or there's a monster.
Are you talking about the Sailor Moon movie?
Are we talking about that? I think we're talking about that one.
She was in, like, wasn't she smoking?
She might have been,
but it was like Did her moon tiara action blow off the Yoma's head?
It might have. I've been looking for it for the longest, like ever since I first told you about it on the podcast, and I've not been able to find it.
Yeah, I don't think that the Sailor Moon movie is on YouTube anymore, but it was like a one-shot movie that kind of like introduced Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask.
Is that the one created by the Abridged team?
It might have been, honestly, because that was the first one that I had watched, and like it was unfinished, and I was looking like for like the second part. Yeah, and I couldn't find it, and it was called Sailor Moon movie, but it was like a solid like 5 minutes long, and that was it. Yeah,
it was a pretty short movie, and like even her costume was more manga inspired than anything else, and she had a mask, but it was makeup. That was her mask. It wasn't necessarily like a mask like it was in the manga. It was painted on makeup. I know exactly what you're talking. I was like, she must be talking about Sailor Moon, because it was pretty short, but it definitely packed a little punch for what it did.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. Especially like because I watched it like a couple times at like 4 or 5 in the morning. I was one of those kids who, like, this is a little funny, but I used to stay up all night, like right in front of my TV, because my TV used to be in between, like it was right in front of my bed, so I would like lay on the floor just watching Sailor Moon fan subs. But also the other experience I had was there's this other Sailor Moon fan sub where it was like the Dark Moon Circus, I guess. It was like
I
Yeah,
remember that
that one
one. It's
too.
so good.
I remember
it
that.
was.
I never watched it, but I remember the trailer for it.
Yep, I watched it and it was so good. And I was like, oh my god, I fucking love. Oh, I need to stop swearing. I'm so sorry. It's not funny. Um, but yeah, I would watch it and it stuck out to me so much because it had Chibiusa in it. And like, as much as the other ones that I had seen, that was the only one that had Chibiusa on it at the time. And mind you, this is what I was like when I was younger. It might be different now. Actually, I think a lot of the fan subs that used to be available when we were younger have been taken down.
Yes, they have.
Now that I think about it,
Yeah,
a lot of
Toei went
Sailor
on a
Moon.
rampage.
Oh, that makes sense. Because I was doing my research a couple of days ago to prepare for the podcast, because there were some things that I wanted to bring up because I saw the fan subs FanWorks question. I was like, I have a lot of experience in this. Let's rewatch some of these so I can like reference them in the podcast and come to find that they're gone. And I was like, well, there goes that.
It actually happened last year, I remember, because one of our episodes got taken down, but it was a hidden episode, so that was okay. But another fan series reached out to me. He's like, yeah, all my stuff's gone. I'm like, oh no. So I started looking around more, and Toei was just taking down everybody.
Jesus.
Oh no.
Because like there were some really good ones. There were also good ones that had like a really good production team. And like I remember like some of these kids at the time I think were in like high school maybe. And the costumes that they had made and the story that they had made for these fan subs were like really good. But yeah, that's just my experience with FanWorks. I also used to read like a lot of oh my god. A lot of Seiya fan fictions. Yeah.
Tee tee.
Tee. That was
Oh, I
me
love
when
you.
I was younger. Listen.
No,
I was
I mean,
a
again,
very
that was my ship when I was young too. So I do think there's something inherently young about the ship at one point, but I absolutely get you.
Right.
yes, because like it's like this guy suddenly is like, "Hey, I'm Mr. Steal Your Girl."
Oh Lord.
Like at the time, I was just like, "Ew, that romance." The same thing with Prince Diamond and Usagi. I was also one of those. Like when I was younger, it was just I would ship Usagi with anyone but Momo. I was just like bad guy trope all day.
Gosh.
When I was younger. But yeah, a lot of the fan subs on YouTube was my experience when I was younger. They're now unfortunately gone, which really sucks because I would have really liked for people who are just now getting into Sailor Moon, especially those who are starting off with Crystal, or like with the musicals now, because I noticed that the musicals and crystals are getting a lot more attention than the original works. We're starting off with those to be able to see the fan works on YouTube, but they're gone, so can't do much about that.
Right. So we talked about reading or writing first, and I want to know, why do you like creating fan? I know that for me, writing Lost Soldier is definitely a passion project of mine, and it's definitely a challenge because the story is in a different setting and the characters are older than what they are. They're not necessarily the same characters. So it's like I can't write in Usagi's voice or Minako's voice because I have basically established new characters there. And in essence, Usagi, or in essence, Sailor Moon, that they are different characters. So I think I like the challenge of writing characters like this, which makes it a lot of fun. And it's also really cool to talk about with other people and express some of the ideas. Like I've had this conversation with Z and Lumi, and they were like on the edge of their seats. They're like, what about this? And what about that? It was a really cool conversation to have creatively, especially like some of the major steps that I'm making, to, basically get through these arcs. Like one of the concepts that I'm introducing is that the Dark Kingdom and the Death Busters are active at the same time, in a sense. So basically, it's like really interesting. Like it's really fun, like creating this world, like, and these characters, and falling in love with the work that you're doing. So, Flora, why do you like writing? Why do you like creating your fanfic?
I mean, this was hard to answer because I'm in a rut right now. But with that, because I haven't been posting a lot, I did recently add up my word count of all words I've posted, and I've written over 1 million words of fanfiction on just the FloraOne account. So there is something I like about it, and it really comes back to that transformative aspect to me. Like, I tried to find the book that I read this from, but I think it was Jameson, but I'm not quite sure about fanfiction. But there's this old quote that I don't quite perfectly recall, but it's about how fanfiction really is about the tradition of telling each other stories about characters you both love, and how really it's a continuation of that whole origin of storytelling. Like, think of how mythology is in essence something that is stories about the same characters recounted and retold lots and lots and lots of time over and over, or like stories of King Arthur and the Round Table that got passed on and changed a little bit and transformed a little bit the more you told it. And like there was this whole time in world history where storytelling was always with pre-established characters, where it was weird to create your own. And in that sense, storytelling was always inherently social, because it's telling stories to others who want to hear it. And thus, they never really just involve a writer, but definitely an audience. And while writing original fanfiction famously can be very lonely, writing fanfiction is meant to be more social. And that social aspect, for me, is really it. I like engaging. I like telling stories about characters that are already loved. I'm a person sitting on a bonfire making up a story of a beloved character that people want to hear, because they love the story too. And I do also think fanfic writers or authors in general are like a different type of fan than non-fanfic writers sometimes. Like, not to make it black and white, but like it's definitely nuanced, and there will definitely be non-fanfic writers who feel the same. But like, I feel writers constantly ask themselves, not what do we like about this, what do we like about that, or discuss like canon points to a T, but we think about would they do this even in terms of canon. Like, we definitely have conversations like this episode X, Y is out of character for this character, and things like that. We're less concerned about the canon and more concerned about the transformative part. Like, in that sense, we sometimes become the characters, not in terms how they relate to us, but in terms of trying to anticipate what they would do if we put them into new scenarios, to put them into new stories and see what would be logical for them. And yeah, in the sense that the canon goes on in our lives constantly, be it talking amongst each other or spitballing ideas or actually writing them down. It's always storytelling to friends with characters we already love.
That's a great answer. Daikon, what about you? Why do you like creating fanfic?
So I mentioned quite a bit earlier that I am like kind of a hopeless romantic and like very like into romance. and I'm happily married and so on and so forth, but I'm still very like, okay, but like I want to get some of that like excitement of like that, new relationship. Are they going to get together? And that like heart pounding adrenaline of like, I'm talking to somebody I have a crush on, and am I completely embarrassing myself? And admittedly, I get this by interacting with anybody in a post-COVID world because, I've lost all my social skills and I have social anxiety, but it's not fun in the way getting people to fall in love is fun. So I think for me personally, I just love telling love stories. I love reading love stories, and especially when it is characters kind of like what Flora said, characters who I know really well, characters who, like I mentioned earlier, Minako is really easy to write, and sometimes she literally just grabs the reins of what's going on and is like, no, this is what's happening now, which is really fun when I'm like, how do I get X ridiculous thing to happen? Where is Minako? Can I bring her into this scene because she will make ridiculous thing happen? Or there was a point when I was writing R is for Reverse where I had mapped out X was going to happen in the scene, and Usagi was like, that is absolutely not going to happen in this scene because this is what's going to happen in this scene. And I was like, okay, cool, we're rolling with that. Which I think is something that when you really know a character well and you kind of understand their heart and their foibles and what makes them tick, you can have that kind of almost collaborative experience with the character of them behaving in a way that maybe isn't in line with what you might have envisioned for the story, but what actually works better because it's consistent with what drives the character. And so, like, I think for me, I really enjoy writing fan fiction because it is a fun experience of getting to enjoy various creative endeavors. Again, that kind of excitement of early relationships. Again, most of my fic is not established relationship. I have like one or two one-shots that are established relationship. But if I'm writing something long fic, it's like, how are we getting these crazy kids together? Because that's personally what I'm into. I'm no offense against anybody who prefers established relationship. I've been in a relationship for over a decade. I get plenty of established relationship in my day-to-day. If I were single all of a sudden, I'd probably be like, oh, give me cozy, like snuggling on the couch and drinking hot chocolate and watching a movie. But like, I get that in my day-to-day.
Right, and I like that. I'm going to get these crazy kids together. Like, I love that I can now match the voice with the descriptions that you put for your stories on the archive. Because I was like, when I read the descriptions, I was like, that's so cute. And now I hear your voice, it just makes it that much better. Jacket,
I write exactly like I talk.
Yeah. Jacket, how about you? Why do you like creating fandom?
Well, I've been writing for several different fandoms recently, and I think my motivations are different for each one that I write in, but specifically for Sailor Moon, I think it's just because I don't want to accept that their story is done, and that there's so many more stories to be told with these characters that I love and that I feel safe with. And, as someone who is not the best in social situations, it's kind of an easy way for me to talk to and relate to other people who love the same thing. So that's really kind of been my biggest motivation for writing. But it can be like a really scary thing because it's really difficult to not put so much of yourself in what you write. So, that can be really difficult. But overall, I just don't want to accept that their stories are done.
That's a great answer. I was literally thinking about that when we were talking about writing earlier, where it's like there's so much more in between these like moments in the series that could be further expanded or further explored, and I like that in some of the stories that you guys have written. It's like it's like you literally, like, depending on the story that you read, you can literally fall into this moment and you can like relate it to a specific episode or a specific arc, and the way it's happening it just draws you in. You're like, oh my gosh, that could totally happen. Or I love that this is expanded in such a way where it gives a better sense of who these people are and what they're going through and the depth of their situations. I think that it's very interesting. Kao, so why do you like creating Sacrifice? And like, I know that Fatal Frame is an inspiration for Sacrifice, but how did you create characters like Karai? And is there another character? Are there other characters that you created that you know?
There are. We have about 5 original characters added into the mix at this point. Plus, we're giving life to other characters that were mentioned in the manga but never actually got a full visual. So we're incorporating them back into it. But just to piggyback off what Jack said, like the reason why we continued is we also felt like the story wasn't over. We needed more. We wanted to put out more. And with the Sailor Moon fan series at the time, everyone was doing it. We all just wanted more and more and more. It was awesome. But aside from that, what kept me going with Sacrifice is I've always loved and appreciated the more serious tones of Sailor Moon, no matter what adaptation. And with Sacrifice, I now have that opportunity to bring those heavier themes into the story, all while keeping some of that, cute, lighthearted humor that is supposed to be there, what makes our characters who they are. And with sorry, I'm out of breath. Like humor-wise, Karai is a very she's Usagi's polar opposite, and she never really had a chance to be reborn, so she's kind of stuck in her old-timey ways, so to speak. But she is the type to get a nosebleed if she sees something a little too risky. That's what I love. She's so stern, but that nosebleed's a coming. But no, definitely, we want to incorporate like harder family situations. We did include two characters actually with a disability, so we're going to touch down on that. Yeah, just bringing the overall serious themes into something I can bring to visual just means the world to me. Like it's an amazing outlet for me.
Okay, and keeping with that, and I'm going to keep you on the line for this next question. And this is actually a question that you introduced, and I kind of mentioned it earlier before we started recording. But what challenges have you faced when creating your fan work?
Well, we peaked at a really high number. At our absolute peak, we were at about 175,000 followers. And as you mentioned before, like interactions are hard to maintain, especially since I've always been the one to be the forefront of the social media, and I've gotten burnt out so many times with both positive and negative comments. The negative comments do weigh down on you quite a bit more because some of them like to get personal just for the sake of getting personal. There's no real reason behind it. They just want to make you hurt. And I've never really figured out why. It's an astounding thing, really. But there's also the people-pleasing factor. When we first came out, we had a little more, a little more practice behind our work. So our visuals were a little more official looking. A lot of people actually mistook our fan series for like the official 6 series because of the way we edited things and incorporated tracings and incorporated whatever to make it look real. But then people started expecting it to look a certain way, and then it got a little too heavy to produce for all of us because we couldn't keep up with the high expectations. And especially, like, I got married, I had a kid, bought a house, and there was no way I could do all this with a full-time job. So unfortunately, we had to let it go. But now with the manga, it's so much better. We have so much more freedom, and we're not reliant on source material anymore, which is the best thing about it.
Right. That's really good, and I like that even with your manga, you are still cognizant of quality
Absolutely.
like, work. And there have been occasions where you're like, does this look okay? Does this flow okay? And
every
and
time I make a stroke on a drawing, does this look okay, guys? Does this hairspray
Right.
look okay?
And there's the cohesion of your team and how you guys make references for each other.
Yeah.
You guys rely on each other, like, and even like passing the baton, like, hey, I can't work on this scene. Can you work on this scene?
Yeah.
I love that teamwork, and sometimes it does take a village and a team to get stuff like that done. And I it's one of the things I appreciate about the work that you guys did, that it was always a team effort. And
that's why now when I look at manga creators, especially the ones who go full color, they're doing it solo. And
Right.
it's incredible what they put out with just one person. I'm like, I couldn't do that. No way. Not in a million years.
But yeah, Flora, have you faced any challenges with your work?
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, you always do a little. I'm definitely there with Kao when it comes to, like, yes, hurtful comments hurt. And they are there sometimes not on purpose. Like, I definitely think benefit of the doubt. Not everyone who comments relates to how personal fan fiction or fan work in general is, and how writing, even just like what people think, like you know, these comments that feel like an Amazon review, that don't kind of
it's very specific.
yes, the kind that don't feel like someone gets that this is a person who wrote this and not a production company, and probably the production company will be hurt by the same comment as well. So there's that. But yeah, in a broader sense, entitlement of me as a person and their access to me, and my output, like people feeling like that's the way that it's framed to me often, like they are owed a certain thing, be it in any type of work I put out, like not only just the fan fiction, but even like the zine we're making right now, etc. And like, yes, people feel the way they feel, and I definitely know that it's sometimes this disconnect from, you know, not realizing there's a person behind. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge for me, where again, I try to see it from their point of view, to not take it personally, because I don't think it's meant to be personal to me. But much worse than hurtful comments and entitlement, sometimes really is lack of engagement. Like right now, it's a very quiet phase in the fanfiction community as is. Like there's very few readers, there's very few commenters, and because, as I said, fanfiction for me is inherently social, is fun because of the social part, this lack of engagement gets to me most and like dries my well of ideas dry in that way. So yeah, that actually, like, I prefer hurtful engagement to lack of engagement, really.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I've noticed the visual community has taken a plummet as well. There's very little engagement these days.
Yeah.
Daikon, have you experienced similar challenges?
So I think for me, fandom and writing is more of an escape, and I have been fortunate in that, like, the majority of the engagement that I have gotten from people in the fandom have been primarily positive, and like when I get an occasionally, like, I'm gonna say insensitive comment where it's like somebody who is pressuring me, like I got an ask where somebody was like, update the current fic that you're working on, please and thank you. And like that was the whole ask. And I'm like, I'm sorry that I have other things going on in my life. Like, but for me personally, the biggest obstacles that I've been facing have been in my non-fandom life. I, you know, as everyone has been, have been going through a pandemic. I also finished grad school in 2021, and I've been dealing with job hunting and jobs that are not necessarily a great fit and are burning me out and things like that. And I'm actually currently recovering from some burnout. And it can be hard when you are stretched too thin to find the time and the inspiration and the energy to write anything. Like, for the last 6 months, so for the 6 months before the last 2 months, I barely wrote anything. And then I've been like taking a step back from some of the stuff that has been draining me and reevaluating my life. And I've written a whole lot more in the last 2 months. Nothing that I've actually posted yet because it's not ready for that. But the output is coming back. So for me, it's more of making sure that things in my personal life, or I guess my non-fandom life, because fandom is more probably my personal life than anything, but the things in my non-fandom life are running smoothly enough that I actually have the ability to create in the way that I would like to.
Okay. And how about you, Jacket? How has the experience been for you?
So I've also been pretty lucky. I haven't had a ton of negative interaction, but I mostly write like romantic type stories, so I think there's not a lot to be mad about with those. I'm sure people could find something though. But my biggest struggle has really been I have terrible ADHD, so just getting myself to sit down and write is sometimes the biggest obstacle that I have. And then I have a 2-year-old and I have a full-time job, and so it's just it makes it hard sometimes to find the time to do the things that I love. And I have found most of the time when I'm like, okay, I'm ready to write, it's when I'm working. It's not when I'm home and have free time or I have a 3-day weekend. So it's just kind of trying to find the balance of being able to sit down and do it.
Right. That makes so much sense. I think some of the challenges that I have faced is that, and I think that most creators find this, is when they are consuming your work and then proceed to tell you how you can do it better, or what doesn't make sense to them. Like when I started Lost Soldier, and the way I'm starting it is like it's basically a retelling of the entire series. So my series starts out in the in what I call the Bronze Age, and it introduces the main cast. It introduces a whole new team of sailor soldiers. So, like before Queen Serenity was Queen Serenity, she was a sailor soldier with her own team. And I was sharing this on my TikTok, kind of like not only to encourage myself, but to also to kind of like enthuse my followers that this is a new story, it's coming out. These are the characters that I'm creating, and I guess because the person was so caught up in the mythology of it, it was like, well, Apollo's a male god. How is he a woman? And I'm like, it's because in the story, I'm keeping with Naoko's ultimate rule is that only a woman can become a sailor soldier. So for me to create this team of characters, they're all women. They're all mothers of the children of the main cast that we know. Like Endymion's mother is Sailor Earth, and Helios' mom is Sailor Sun. So it's like the fact that it didn't make sense to them, they proceeded to tell me how to write it. It's like, you are more than welcome to take aspects of whatever I'm writing and create your own, but to think that you have the ability to dictate how I write diminishes my creativity and also diminishes my enthusiasm to create and share the story with you if I'm considered to be at the whim and mercy of your input, where it's like I wouldn't be able to write or even enjoy my writing if I'm at the mercy of my audience. So I think it's very interesting trying to find that balance where it's like most of the input from my story I have gotten from other people and I am incorporating, but it's also like someone who has no idea what's going on, and they're already like, like review bombing me, and I'm like, wait a minute, like I haven't even started yet, and you're already like tearing me down. So I think it's very interesting that those challenges, and I like that not all experiences are negative, and that there are some positive experiences that come along with it, and that not all challenges are the same. So when it comes to your work, do you prefer to make serial work, or are you more comfortable with making one-shot fanfics? Kao, I know that Sacrifice is considered a one-shot, but at one point it was serial with the YouTube series. So
it was, and it still kind of is now, because it's going to be a continuous thing going on forward. But just to touch down on that, I've never read many fanfics, and quite frankly, guys, if I ever tried to read a fanfic, everything was totally normal, and then all of a sudden, her nipples perked up at the sight of her prince, and then I stop. I'm just like, what? Pardon me? When did we go this route? So
that is not the good kind of fanfic. That is not the good kind. There is brilliant kinds.
Spicy ones, but I'm the spicy ones. Good intention. If they were spicy, I don't know. But if you guys can guide me as to like where I can go look and find fan fiction to avoid this, that'd be super duper. And at the same time, if I find one I really like, I wouldn't mind like having a collab with someone who I find is a good writer, has a good story, and do like maybe a small comic one shot or design some of their characters. I would love that. Just to give me a break from Sacrifice, essentially.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Kao, because I was reading In Your Orbit by Daikon, and it was adorable. I guess probably it was very heartwarming. Like, it's very emotional for me reading the first two chapters. I read the entire thing, but the first two stood out to me the most, and I was like, I would love it. The way I was reading it, it felt like I was reading a manga short. And I was like, I would love to see this. I would love to see this visually, because it was very cute, and it just was amazing. Like I was glad that I picked that one out of all the stories I could have read. It was a great introduction to Daikon's writing, but it was like, I really wish there was a visual to this, because it's too cute not to visualize.
Say no more. Daikon, message me when we're done.
Oh my god, now I'm getting all like flustered and embarrassed, you guys. and honestly, like the In Your Orbits are like, they're like just little mini writing exercises. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, it'll be like, I'm gonna take a prompt and I'm gonna just try to write like 500-600 words unbaited, just get it out. So like the fact that you're like, oh, these are super cute and they're standing out to me is like kind of like embarrassing.
Don't be embarrassed. Oh my gosh, Z. It's just like Z, like just like can't take it. We're gonna shine a light. We're gonna shine a light on all of you guys, because honestly, it's like the stories that I read were just like amazing. So, Flora, is serial or one shot? What is your preference?
Honestly, I have none. Both have its merits. Like, to me, none are better than the other, and they have to fit the theme of the story. Like, there is one thing that I definitely dislike is when the theme doesn't fit the length of the fic. So in this sense, like some themes like single emotions to be explored, etc., they make a better one-shot, and other themes like wanting an updated take on Sailor Moon make a better serial. In that sense, I mean, I definitely do both. It calls for this story in that sense. I do want to comment on what Kao was saying, though, to like, I mean, sex researcher here, so like, my stories are definitely have all the sex in them, and there is also a huge distinction to me in fan fiction, seeing someone like, I think you can really tell someone's age and way of being brought up around sex in the fan fiction they write in that sense.
In my defense, it was a completely normal story until that happened.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, again, since I do think like, just to break a lance, and I know you didn't mean it like that, but some of the best fan fiction I've read has been fan fiction containing sex scenes, and
no doubt.
it can be absolute beautiful. Like, I'm forever inspired and aspiring to write in that way, that it can incorporate sex as something as a normal sense of communication in a relationship in that way.
Totally.
But yeah, I'm
totally
also
agree with you, but if I'm not looking for it, kind of thing, you
For
know,
sure.
I didn't expect it to
For
pop
sure.
up. But
That's the beauty of
I love
tagging
me a
system.
spicy story if I'm in the mood for a spicy story. Oh,
Yeah. For sure. But yeah, I'm also very curious, because you've been mentioning here and there, because Grayson, you were saying you all did homework. I'm very interested to hear what of us you've been reading and forming your opinion about. Like,
Absolutely. But yes, Daikon. When it comes to serial or one-shots, do you have a preference?
So they're very different to write. And I think that in both cases, it can be something to the effect of, I have an idea, how long do I need to get it done? Now, my experience with writing longer form, more serialized form, is it can sometimes take some twists and turns that maybe you weren't anticipating when you first sat down and started writing. So, like, the runner-up, for example, I was job hunting when I was writing that, and it became a story about Usagi job hunting and dealing with the pressure and the insecurities and so on and so forth. And also having a friends with benefits relationship with Mamoru at the same time, and it all going horribly stressfully, crushing her like inner insecurities and imposter syndrome and so on and so forth. And it turned out to be very personal. But when I first sat down to be like, I want to write a story where Mamoru and Usagi are just in a friends with benefits situation, none of that was what I envisioned. And I think that that can be very fun when you're writing like a serialized fic, is how does it evolve? What parts of you get kind of pulled into it? And the one-shots can be more of like, here is the specific situation and I can totally tell the story in 25,000 words or less. And so here we go. But they're both really fun. And sometimes like you just write out that, like I said, that 500, 1,000 word story just to like scratch that itch and send it on its merry way.
if I'm allowed to cut in on that, or comment on that, because as you've been saying, Grace, and I better both for Daikon and for UglyGreenJacket, and those are my absolute favorite moments of this particular social pod of fan fiction. Like Daikon was saying when she was writing that like she may not have seen that this is becoming into something that's morphing into something that's going on in her life. I saw it a mile wide coming and I enjoyed it so much. And that's the same, like this has happened to me as well in so much fan fiction that UglyGreenJacket was writing, where I was feeling like, because I know these people, because I love these people and I love their writing, seeing that reflected in their writing is a whole other kind of experience, because you definitely not only, this is something that you would absolutely miss if you, of course, don't know their stories, don't know what's going on in their lives, but to have this privileged position as their better, as knowing them, as knowing what's going on in their lives, because I'm also their friend, is amazing. It's honestly, like, I'm better for UglyGreenJacket stuff that's not even in the Sailor Moon fandom. It's in fandoms that I don't know, and I have the same experience because she's putting herself into her writing so much that I'm seeing her through the wide writing, and it's a whole nother layer to it.
That is such a beautiful take on it. I've never looked at fan fiction that way, but now I kind of see it differently. That's wow.
I agree, and I also can, like, just from the few stories that I have read, you have no idea the amount of satisfaction I have gotten from the stories. And it just shows not only the quality of writing, but the quality of person that's writing it. And like, honestly, because I read them again last night, and the same stories. And for me, it was just like, some of them were like a breath of relief, and some of them were I was so engrossed. And that's what I love about a good story, is when you're so immersed in the world where it's like you're imagining it, and living that experience. Like you're basically inserted into it without even trying. And that's what I love about like stories or books in general. It's like when I'm so engrossed that I'm totally relating to the character or characters in that particular story. Jacket, what about you? Do you have a preference for serial or one-shots?
Writing, I would say one-shots they're just easier for me. I can much more easily find the time and the energy to put into a one-shot. Reading, I do enjoy multi-chapters. I used to not ever even read anything that wasn't completed because I just couldn't handle that. But now I will read works in progress. But to kind of piggyback off of what Flora was saying about stuff that I have written, like I wrote a fic called The First Year, which is 20, I think there's 25 chapters in it, that kind of goes through different prompts of Usagi Mamoru's first year of marriage. And it's just complete fluff nonsense. And I didn't realize it at the time, but she pointed out to me later, like my first year of marriage was horrendous because I was depressed. I wasn't taking my medicine. And so like, it was so therapeutic to me to write what I had wished my first year of marriage was like through these other two people. But again, I think sometimes you don't even realize that you're doing it until much later.
Right. That makes so much sense. And it also like touches on the fact that it's like you do put a lot of yourself into these stories and even the prompts themselves. And I think, it's like sometimes it comes from a personal place of not necessarily experience, but also a yearning for a different experience. I've experienced that in some of my writing too. I wrote a series of original short stories, and it was called Untitled because I couldn't get a title for them. But they were all like love stories. I'm a hopeless romantic myself, but they were all love stories, and they were stories that like reflect on what I would like to see in a relationship, or what I have seen in other relationships that I think a lot of people don't really talk about. One story that I wrote in particular was about a couple, and this couple was fighting, and it seemed like like they were like at the end of their relationship and stuff like that. And it turns out the reason why this couple is fighting is because the female character was recently diagnosed with Huntington's disease, and she didn't know how to tell her husband, so she was fighting with him to try to get him to leave her. And it just made the relationship that much stronger. And it was totally like inspired out of nowhere. Like it was just something that just came to mind. But it was like, it's not only to our benefit, it's to the benefit of others. I had posted that story on Tumblr, and a user reached out to me and they're like, is this a real story? Because I've had a similar experience. And I think that's when you write stories like that and it touches people in such a way where they reach out, or it's or even like personally it's just something that they hold near and dear to their heart. I think it's a satisfaction you feel as a writer that doesn't compare to anything else. Hey Sailor Guardians, this is just part 1 of our February FanWorks episode. In the name of the moon, tune into part 2 for more Sailor Moon questions and discussion with our guests.